It's a little after 1. Why don't we go ahead and get started and others can join as they arrive.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, thanks for everybody sitting in on today's budget meeting. The process is going to be very similar to last year's process that we went through as far as the budget goes, where Paul has a presentation that he's going to give, kind of goes over assumptions and for the upcoming year, projections, those type of things, and summary of where we're at. And then we'll go through, the revenues, which Paul and Jeff will cover, and then we'll go through expenditures in the general fund. Each department head will cover their own department, and then we'll get into the capital, which is usually where we have the largest discussion, is in the capital, because we have so many projects and needs and limited funds. So about 2 o'clock or so, we're gonna, I think Sheriff Pelley's gonna be on. We're gonna go over the sheriff's budget when he comes on, no matter where we're at in the budget, and go over that, and then allow him to make any comments that he might have, just so we are considerate of his time. And then we'll get back to where we left off before he got on the meeting. So I think I want to thank Paul and Jeff and all his staff and all the department heads and their staff for all the hard work they put into the budget. It's not an easy task, and with everything else they got going on, I appreciate all their efforts on that. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Matt. And then one of the additional agenda item, we were scheduled from, I think, 1 to 4, and then we'll evaluate at that point in time what additional course of action is needed.
Yep.
So first item really, or first agenda item, has to do with the budget calendar. We have this 3-hour review meeting. Depending upon how it goes, we may or may not need a second review meeting. But at least right now, we're looking at budget adoption, public comments in a formal meeting, your first meeting in October, on October 12th. So that's at least the tentative schedule right now. As Matt mentioned, we'd just like to throw a quick PowerPoint out there to give a 20,000 foot view of how we're looking at the 2021 budget. After this particular presentation, we'll go ahead and get that posted to the website as well. So we'll go ahead and start there. Jeff, can you bring that one up? So this will look familiar to what you've seen in prior years. I would encourage you to ask questions as we go along. And again, this is the big picture view. We'll get down into much more detail during the individual department budget reviews. So again, the budget document obviously is one of the board's most critical documents to articulate the board's policy decisions, its goals, its priorities. This year's preliminary budget is about $53 million. It includes the 4 separate entities that you sit on as either directors or board members or commissioners. But effectively, we look at this as the total town budget. The primary driver for revenues for the budget, as I think you're all aware, is sales tax revenues. That, as well as the companion revenues with permits that are pulled, and we generate what are called use tax revenues from construction activities, as well as vehicle use tax revenues.
Paul, sorry to interrupt. Just from a matter of housekeeping, as you go through, I know you're going to open up a bunch of documents. I've got all the documents, obviously, all of us have the documents on our devices, and that's going to be where our notes are going to be. And so just helping us orient to the document that you're opening, which, to be honest, I know I saw this, but I already can't locate this PowerPoint. Having some
yeah, and this is my bad, Kevin. Sorry about that. This is usually something that we just generate, and I did not send it out to you. Again, we will get this to you. Again, the intent of this is not to get into the detailed questions which you have on your individual sheets. We will go to those as well. But this just is intended to provide, I think, our citizens more than anybody else, just a big picture view of the budget. So sorry for that confusion.
No worries.
Again, majority of sales tax generated by 5 to 10 businesses in town. So we're always cognizant of the activity of those particular businesses. In this particular COVID cycle, as the board has been updated over the last several months, it's rather counterintuitive perhaps to some, but we have seen double-digit sales tax increase for the first 7 or 8 months of the year from sales tax perspective. That's because of the nature of our stores. They're really more necessity stores, purchases versus discretionary. So we're looking at a double-digit increase this year in sales tax revenue in 2020. That's why the last bullet you'll see on there is in 2021, we're actually anticipating that sales tax is going to drop about 4% next year to more traditional levels. So that's because of the spike this year, followed by getting to more traditional levels. As it relates fund by fund, so we're in something called fund accounting. So they're essentially different pots of money. So just a quick reminder that the general fund, which finances most of the day-to-day operations, be it the public works operation, parks and rec, public safety, come out of the general fund, and the general fund receives 55 to 60% of its revenues from sales and use taxes. So that's an important driver there. As it relates to both our open space and capital funds, those are funded almost exclusively through sales tax revenues, or that blue section of that pie chart. Our interchange district, which again was created to perform improvements to the interchange of McCausland and Highway 36, and then do maintenance adjacent to that particular area, is funded at about half with sales and use tax revenues. And as a note of clarification, the dedicated sales tax we have for this particular operation is a 0.16% sales tax, and that will go away after 2022. It was a dedicated 20-year term for that particular sales tax. So after that point in time, this operation will be funded exclusively by property tax revenues, primarily on the businesses within the Superior Marketplace. So we created the budget and managed the operation where we're ready for that transition to stop receiving sales tax after 2022.
Hey, Paul, is that sales tax, is that actually sunsetting, or is it just that the debt associated with it is being retired, so there's no need to fund from the 0.16 anymore?
It is in fact sunsetting. So
Okay.
It was a debt designated 20 years. Actually, the debt that is still outstanding will run through 2024, but that is supported by property tax revenues.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
And
Like,
not necessarily for today's conversation, but specifically in regards to that debt, I'd like to flag that as a discussion point for a future meeting for the board to discuss bringing that to the voters to repurpose and continue collecting that tax revenue, whether there's appetite for that. So not a today discussion, but something that I'd like flagged for our discussion in the future.
we'll go ahead and note that, Ken. Thank you.
And just for clarification, that 0.16 sales tax, because it's SMID, that is only collected on sales that occur within the confines of SMID. It's not townwide.
Good question, Mark. Actually, it was a town-wide approved sales tax for the interchange district. So if you shop down at Safeway, you'll be paying that tax as well.
Okay, thank you.
What we note as the Superior Urban Renewal Authority, or SURA, one component of that is sales tax revenues generated in the marketplace area. And those revenues, a portion of those revenues are going to reimburse the developers for public improvements within the marketplace. And that source of revenue obviously is funded 100% by sales tax revenue. And then again, a note on this particular line, and we'll get into detail on this, the obligation to the developer to reimburse them for the public improvements, that will go away in early 2022. And again, after that point in time, assuming sales tax revenues stay at a constant level, that order of magnitude of revenue, anywhere between $2 to $2.5 million, will now then begin flowing to the general fund. So that'll be a positive indication in the budget beginning in 2022. So just a reminder on that. And then the final chart, and this is again probably a counterintuitive chart. This one represents the Superior Metropolitan District, which is essentially our utility operation. And that pie chart is showing no blue, which is great. That the operation for the utilities are funded 100% by the fees and revenues associated with the water, sewer, and storm utility. That is not been the case over the last decade, where there had been material transfers out of the general fund to support the utility. That is not happening next year, and we're not projecting that happening into the future. So that's good news. Self-supporting utilities not requiring outside funding sources to pay for those particular operations.
Well, can I just stop you there for a second and just step back to the SURA sales tax? Sure. So the SMID 0.16% sales tax is expiring in 2022. That's sunsetting. That's townwide. The SURA sales tax, what is that rate? And that is not sunsetting, correct?
So the interchange is correct, as you identified, sunsetting 2022. The SURA rate is effectively the town sales tax rate. So the 3.46% is initially identified as SURA revenue. Now, what we do is we carve out dedicated revenue sources. So out of the town sales tax rate of 3.46%, we carve out the SMID revenues of 0.16%, the open space revenues of 0.3%, and the capital improvement revenues of 0.3%. Those are dedicated revenues. So the net SURA revenues are the remainder of that, or 2.7% of sales tax revenue. So the town's 3.46% rate. Does that make sense, Mark?
Right. So that net of all the other dedicated sales taxes is what we effectively attribute to SURA.
Correct.
Right.
And then that revenue, at least right now, is shared between the town and payments to the developer, and then those developer payments, roughly $2 to $2.5 million. Those are what will be satisfied in early 2022, and then will start flowing to the town.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So again, and I sound like a broken record, but we need to be cognizant of some of these particular items. We're always diligent in monitoring our sales tax revenue. We see some drivers, some factors that could negatively impact that revenue. One is aging population, and the sales or the purchase patterns of aging population are typically away from stuff and more for travel and healthcare, things of that nature. So that's a concern, not perhaps a material concern, but concern. More important is competition from retail business that pops up in an adjacent municipality, which may negatively affect sales tax revenue here in town. We've been fortunate that has not happened to this point of time on a material basis, but it's something we're always aware of. And then the hail chart I show you the last couple of years as well, and it could be hail or it could be COVID, but between the hail down in Lakewood in 2017 or through the COVID situation, you will have seen that some of the retail malls have closed operations or curtailed operations. Those are obviously concerns for us as well. But again, because of the nature of our retailers, other than a natural disaster like the hail issue in Lakewood, which could have a short-term, hopefully catastrophic impact on sales tax revenues, that's something to be aware of, obviously. Something we're not projecting, though. And then and this is repetitive, I think, of what we were drilling in with some of Mark's questions, but a big chunk, about a third, 30% of the revenues generated by the marketplace right now don't come to the town. They go to reimburse the developer for those public improvements, and those will go away after 2022. Just a general discussion on construction and how that impacts the town. Generally, because of the nature of construction we have here, it's infill construction. We're not doing flagpole annexations and running 3 or 4 miles down the road and adding new utility lines and roadways that we're maintaining. But our construction is infill within the existing boundaries of our road infrastructure and our utility infrastructure. And as such, we don't have material costs associated with that because of the high values typically associated with the constructions that are happening in town, as well as the limited new demands on our service levels. Generally, new construction is positive for the town. You can see at the bottom that we're talking about over a 5-year period that generates over 30 million in one-time revenues. A lot of those go to our utility operations to help fund utility capital projects. And then we have, some material ongoing revenues even after we account for new operating expenses that, show the positive fiscal impact of construction in town.
Hey, Paul, just a question about this slide. So, and I think it's covered in detail in the budget book, I think on page 6, for me, on the commercial side, I don't think we have an approved FDP for any of it, whether it's a hotel, office, or even retail. But then, the upper half of this is all residential construction. What I don't know is of the 30 million or 4 million ongoing, 5 million ongoing, what's the balance of commercial versus residential drivers? It's more a question of, what's more likely to get executed in the next 5 years, given that we have approved FDPs for all of these homes, but none on the commercial side.
Right, and there, as you have stated, Neil, there some of those revenues, the one-time revenues and the ongoing revenues, there is an assumption that is driven by commercial development, but it's the lion's share of those revenue numbers are revenues generated from the housing construction that in fact we have.
Okay. I don't know if, just for my own help, it would be helpful to know how much of the 30 is residential driven and then how much of the ongoing 5 is again residential driven.
Sure, we can certainly get that as follow-up for you.
Thanks.
And then the next couple of charts that Jeff will show you just show, generally the development and the some of the absorption assumptions that we're assuming with both the residential side and the commercial side. Now, the commercial chart, as you'll see, most of those obviously are in out years. So if they don't come to fruition, if they are delayed for whatever reason, that fiscal impact, as I mentioned, is typically less. And since it's further out, it's easier for us to adjust and accommodate for that. But we'll get some level of additional detail so you can kind of look at the difference between what residential brings in as well as commercial. A component of taxes here in town are property taxes. It's not nearly as material as property tax revenues for a fire district, a school district, or a county. It accounts for 10 to 15% of our general fund revenues. But we realize it's this sometimes is kind of an elevated topical item to discuss with citizens. But long story short, on property tax revenues and our property tax rate, we have either kept the rate stable or in fact we've decreased property tax rates for the last 18 years. Right now, we only have 3 property tax rates that we have control over. We have our general governmental property tax rate. We have a dedicated mill levy to support the Louisville Library. That's the second property tax rate. And the third is within the interchange district. So in 2021, what we're proposing is the governmental property tax rates for general operations, as well as for supporting library services with Louisville. Those will stay constant, but we're able to reduce the property tax rate marginally for the interchange district. And effectively, who that impacts are the businesses within Superior Marketplace. They'll get a little bit lower property tax bill from us. But again, when you look at your property tax bill, you know that less than 10% of your bill is attributable to Superior, with those other three agencies bearing 90% essentially your property tax bill. So real quick takeaways again, over the last number of years. Jeff, next chart, please. We've actually over last, whatever that is, 15 years or so, been able to decrease the general town property rate by about 10%. We're down to 7.93 mils. And again, a reminder that includes an ongoing credit that we've been carrying for the last 15 years or so of roughly 4.2 mils. So technically the town would have the ability to charge roughly that 8 mil levy plus another 4 mil levy. But over the last decade and a half, we've elected to carry that mill levy credit of 4.2 mils, and we're proposing to do that in this year's budget.
And I'll jump in real quick. So a reminder for everyone on the board. So if we were to actually collect that 4.1, almost 4.2 mill levy that's currently being credited, that is, I think we were estimating just over $1 million, Paul, that represents in collections. Is that right?
That is correct.
And that has additional bonding capacity if we were to go out and bring on some more debt for the town for any type of project. And I think it's really important for us to be thinking about what are our long-term and out-year projects that are currently unfunded. We brought this up at a finance committee meeting, and I gave a quick update at one of our board meetings about it. But I want to say, and Paul, correct me if I'm remembering the numbers wrong, there were at least, I think, $15 million of unfunded infrastructure projects, but the entire list was, I think, over $50 million of unfunded projects just overall. And that 50 million, not everything on that list necessarily would or should be funded or move forward with, but infrastructure projects alone represented 15 million of that. So that's something we as a board need to be thinking about. I want to make sure that when all of us are done serving on this board, we're leaving the people who replace us and future boards in a good place to make sure our town can meet all the necessary obligations. And in my mind, we should be having a very active conversation even this year about whether this credit continues to make sense. So we don't need to have that at this exact moment, but as we get deeper into this, that might be a conversation that we continue to have.
And Ken, just to confirm, the order of magnitude you talked about is correct. 15 million for streets and 50 plus in total. That is correct.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
And then Jeff, the next slide, the other property tax rate that we've been able to help the businesses with is that within the marketplace, where we've seen over the last decade roughly a 34% decrease in that property tax rate, and that's because of the strength of those businesses, the increased valuations of those businesses, infill within that particular area. But again, this property tax rate supports not only debt service, I think that Mark brought up before, for the interchange district, but some level of operations. So what we'll see, that the debt for this particular, for the interchange improvements goes away after 2022, and we will see a material mill levy decrease at beginning in 2025. What did I say? The debt goes away in 2024, then the decrease in 2025 for the mill levy.
Hey, Paul,
Quick overview.
Quick question. So there's a ballot question on the de-Gallagherizing of the state. I think it's Amendment B, be a constitutional amendment. Obviously, we don't know what the prospects are of passage, but obviously that would have a significant impact on all governments in terms of how they're collecting their residential assessments and commercial assessments. Have any of the documents that you prepared contemplated what would happen in the event that ballot measure actually passes? Or do you have any comments on that?
So the budget is predicated on, so currently, let me back up one step and I'll try to be brief here, but what Mark is alluding to is on the commercial side, commercial businesses are taxed at 29% of their valuation. Residential properties are taxed at, or valued, excuse me, at 7.15% of their total valuation. That the 29% is constant. That is constant from the Gallagher Amendment. The home values, that 7.15% valuation percentage, that is the one that's been decreasing over the years. Generally, what this November Gallagher ballot amendment would do would be to freeze that 7.15% and not decrease it. And all things being considered, if in fact your home value stays the same, this valuation rate decreases, and the property rates stay the same, then revenues will in fact decrease. What we've assumed the budget, Mark, kind of circuitous way to get there is that we've assumed that the ballot item does not pass, and then we have, again, gradual valuation decreases for residential. Those then, though, are typically offset by your actually property value from the assessor's office increasing a little bit, plus new growth. So if in fact that ballot initiative passed, if we maintained our property tax rate or our mill levy, then we would have a modicum of additional revenues flowing to the town. Order of magnitude, maybe an extra $100,000, just to give you a general order of magnitude.
Okay.
We'll go through these governmental fees in much more detail thereafter, but just as a general highlight, Leslie is proposing some modifications to the existing fee schedule, and more importantly, implementing new fees associated with the 1500 Colton facility. So she'll go into quite a bit more detail on those. We are looking at an increase in the landscape maintenance fee. This is effectively the $30 a month fee we're charging single-family homeowners within the town for the enhanced landscaping throughout our community. This will actually be the first fee increase since 2004, but again, an inflationary 3% increase there, and we'll go into level of detail when reviewing that particular budget. And I know Martin and his staff are currently working on rebidding the trash and recycling program for those outside Rock Creek Ranch. Currently, it's at $9.65 a month. It's been at that level since 2012, and I think within the next month or two, we will have potentially a new contract, which might include a new fee for that particular service. On the utility side, again, this is pretty consistent record that we've seen over the last couple of years, but for 2 of our 3 utilities, we are proposing no fee increases. That would be our water and our storm drainage utilities. Last, I think, water rate increase was in 2017 or 2018. The last storm increase was in 2015, 2016. We do have a 5% fee increase proposed for our sewer operation. It equates for a household about $150 a month. And actually the sewer utility is the one we're seeing that is getting the most interest from the state and the feds as it relates to mandated improvements and improving the discharges of the flows with that particular operation. And that, for example, is part of the $7 to $8 million project that we're doing down at the sewer plant right now. So that's really why that fee increase is needed.
Just a question, or
Yep.
Sorry, I really just want a question between water, sewer, and storm. Does each one of those cost centers have to run independently, or could you, for example, increase water by 10% and keep sewer and storm flat?
So
I mean, if you're trying to drive behavior, to decreasing water usage, an easier way to do that is to slightly increase the cost of the water. And if you're providing a surplus in revenue at the water facility, can we use that to subsidize a potential loss at sewer or storm?
So typically, you handle, these enterprises need to be standalone businesses. So each
Okay.
one as a standalone business.
Okay.
Now, there are other mechanisms, Neil, that we can do to encourage conservation. And perhaps the most onerous is increase the price of water.
Oh,
So,
I have a question, just follow. Is that a best practice or is that a legislative requirement?
So it generally,
So
Kevin,
maybe answer it now, but if you guys could take the, I think Neil's question is good. And if we could change behavior and maybe not balance the revenue to expense line item at this type of detail, is that something that we have the flexibility to do? It might not be your recommended best practice, and we'll thank you. That's why we have you, right? But, or is it a legislative requirement? You can't do it because they may be, the board's decision may be different based on those answers. Maybe the same, but it could be different.
And actually where I was going is just comparing my water bill to others in the Denver metro area. Our water costs are substantially lower than some of the other, medium-sized cities. I think that's fantastic, but, I think it potentially encourages a different type of behavior than the folks in Parker.
and I think this may be a topic perhaps for future conversation. We do have the flexibility to modify that. The delta between our low, so we were in a tiered rate structure. So the more water you use, the higher the cost is per unit. And there's a 3 times delta for when you start out at $3.51 per 1,000 gallons, and that'll spike to over $10 per 1,000 gallons once you exceed 40,000 gallons. So, we currently have that approach in place, but I think I don't want to get mired down in that particular dialogue right now, but we have some flexibility. But back to one of your original questions, Neil, can't generate water revenue and throw it at the sewer operation. Can't do that. And the final component associated with this utility is the one-time connection fees that we have for when a new homeowner or a new commercial business attaches or to our system. We charge them a one-time fee, and those fees we've been increasing by construction inflator every year, and that this year's inflator is that 1.74% figure. And then quick overview of staffing changes, and we'll go into this in much more detail, but for next year's budget, we're looking at a new full-time position of a sustainability analyst. And then Leslie is looking at some part-time help at staffing the rec center and the community center and the programs down there at the community center, as well as a community relations clerk. And both Martin and Leslie will go into more detail on those positions when reviewing their budgets. The next slide is just a takeaway of just some of the general staffing increases we're looking at over the 5-year period. I would say nothing set in stone, but these positions we do have programmed into the budget. So just, just a general takeaway for you there. Quick operating summary, and again, more detail to follow, but both Leslie and Martin will go into, why we need these new positions and what enhanced operations they'll provide. We're looking at doing a citizen survey next year. We'll be obviously expanding our community programs primarily once we get the community center open and start programming that particular facility. And then on a monitoring standpoint, with Jefferson Parkway, the oil and gas activity, Rocky Mountain Airport, we have monies set aside to obviously continue to monitor those three items, those 3 areas. On the capital side, $11 million in governmental projects, a big chunk of that, again, going to street maintenance with the focus on McCaslin, and Alex will go into detail when we're reviewing that particular budget item. Alex is also looking at construction of the Highway 36 trail extension. That's roughly a $1.5 million project with a little over $1 million coming in grants from DRCOG. We're also looking at beginning the process of designing the undergrounding, the electrical undergrounding in original town. So that's proposed for design in 21, construction in 22. And then we also have a town hall expansion as another major capital project included there. We'll talk in much more detail about that later this afternoon. Leslie has a number of park and rec projects. Our primary focus here is maintaining, obviously, our existing infrastructure with improvements at parks and tennis courts. But we are looking at some new items, some new shade structures throughout the community, looking at the xeriscape improvements throughout the community, really enhancing our level of tree and shrub inventory. And we're looking at spending almost collectively $250,000 a year in tree and shrub replacement, and that's about a $100,000 increase over current year's budget. Then we also always have the capital maintenance activities at the pools. For our utility operations, we have the big project that we're undertaking right now for capital maintenance and odor control at the wastewater plant. The big project at the water plant includes enhanced water treatment through ultraviolet disinfection, and a material capital or material expense for the town will ultimately be our contribution to this Windy Gap firming project, the construction of Chimney Hollow Reservoir. So Alex will go in quite a bit of detail when we review the water capital project on that particular account. And then I think this came up in some recent dialogue on the development project, but we'll be doing some additional enhancements to the Coal Creek drainage area between 2nd and McCaslin. And so Alex will get into that level of detail as well. So again, just snapshots of capital debt, which seems to be an interest, which should be, but we continue to actively address our outstanding debt. We're talking about material pay down in debt in 2021 of roughly $4.6 million. Over the next 4 or 5 years, we'll actually have 3 debt obligations going away. One is the SURA obligation I talked about. Once that obligation is paid to the developer for their public improvements that they installed around Superior Marketplace, those monies, $2 to $2.5 million annually, will flow to the general fund. The interchange district, once that debt is paid off in 2024 for the improvements to the McCaslin interchange, we will see lower property tax rates to the businesses within the Superior Marketplace there. And then in 2025, the big phase of enterprise debt or SMD1 debt will be paid off. And essentially what is happening is we'll have that debt paid off, but then we'll have effectively a new debt or a new annual payment associated with Chimney Hollow Reservoir. But the timing is such where we will not have to look at any material modifications or increases to our water rates to pay for this Chimney Hollow project, with the existing debt being paid off in 2025 for our district.
Hey, Paul, I think the town has done a really nice job, obviously reducing our total debt load from, 71 million back in 2006 to where we're currently sitting at 38.5 million. Obviously things are changing with the CenturyLink purchase and 1500 Colton, but my question is, has the town explored potentially, given the low interest rate environment that we're in, kind of globally refinancing all outstanding debt to the extent that we can to take advantage of the low interest rates right now? I mean, I don't know what rates we're paying on the outstanding debt, but it seems like we have the opportunity to potentially save some money on our interest obligations.
We do. The existing, Jeff, go ahead and slip to the next screen. That Mark gave us a great lead in. This is just a takeaway on kind of what that has looked like over the years. The existing debt that we have before we issued that this past year for 1500 Colton for the acquisition and the improvements there, for the $7 million for our wastewater treatment plant, and for open space. All our other debt obligations have been refunded to the extent that we can. So we don't right now have any refunding activities because of the Tax Reform Act passed in 2017 and 2018, which does not allow us to do what is called advanced refundings, we won't have an ability to look at refunding the newly issued debt for a number of years. By the newly issued debt, I mean the sewer debt and the open space debt. So long story short, Mark, we've refunded all that we can. We're in great shape. You know, interest rates are relatively low. That story that you're seeing with that graph in front of you shows, you know, a spike of outstanding debt in 2006. And what that generally represents is, you know, we built our community. We started to build our community. We acquired water rights, and we built water plants and sewer plants and things of that nature. We've paid that down, and then beginning in 19 and 20, we're reinvesting in our community, either through capital maintenance activities at a sewer plant, or we're buying open space, or buying new community centers for the community. But again, we're cognizant of that, and we're always trying to manage that and get the best value for the buck. And then going forward, new proposed debt, we like to note this if in fact we have anything planned over the next 5 years or so. Our contribution to this water storage project, what we call the Chimney Hollow Reservoir, is roughly $31.5 million. Technically, this will not be debt on our books, but what it'll be 30 years of $1.6 million annual, what are called allotment contracts. The board will get much more information on this either at the end of this month or into October, where we'll have to enter into this allotment contract, but it's a long-term material commitment, which is why I wanted to show it here. And then the only other debt would be if in fact is for the proposed town hall expansion. We would be looking at roughly $4.9 million for design and construction of that facility. But again, much more dialogue on that as we move forward. So again, we'll get this PowerPoint posted on the website for folks to see. Sorry I didn't get it out before, but again, the intent was just to try to give just a general, big picture overview of what's going on. So any additional questions associated with this before we drill into some of the very detailed, specific, revenue reviews we're going to do in expense reviews? Hearing none. Jeff, would you go ahead and hop to the governmental fee structure, or fee schedule? So as part of the town statutes, it identifies annually the board will approve governmental fee schedule. So that's what you see in front of you. And this will be anywhere, as you see from page one, from liquor licenses to park and rec fees. So this is a red line document. We've made some changes to it, and back to an item that Kevin brought up. Now we're getting into the 177-page PDF that was downloaded to PowerPoint. We provided an initial fee schedule for you. It was a red line. And as I just said, we made some changes to it, and we'll highlight those. But generally, what we're talking about, for example, on this first page, if you can roll that up a little bit, Jeff. But we'll see about 2/3 of the way down. This is where we have trash and recycling at that $965, and that'll be determined here over the next several months. We're proposing below that the 3% increase to our monthly landscape fee for residents here in town. What else do we have going on here, Jeff? We'll just kind of, so we're going to just focus on proposed changes to the fee schedule. So we have, Alex's charges that he charges kind of new developers to review, their infrastructure plans. Jeff just went through some of our building permit expenses. We're not proposing any changes there, but we are proposing some slight changes to the existing park and rec fees, as well as new fees for 1500 Colton. So Leslie, do you want to just kind of talk briefly about these particular items?
Sure. I'll go through some of these red line changes, and then you can let me know if you have questions. Right now, we're looking at larger gatherings of people for shelter rentals or open areas in the park. that for groups of over 150, they would require a special use permit. I think that's consistent at each of these locations. We're also looking at charging additional fees for groups over 50. So 50 to 100 would pay an additional $25. And then over 150 or over 100 to 150 would pay that additional 50. Last year we did have, there was the ability to charge, but we did not specify a fee. So that's the change this year in those shelter and park rental fees. Going down to the pool fees, made some slight changes.
Real quick, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So if I'm reading this correctly, it says, and I'm looking at the increase in the fees, it says shelters with gatherings between 50 to 100 will be charged an additional 25 per hour. Gatherings between 100 and 150 will be charged an additional $50 per hour. What if it's 151 people or over? Shouldn't we have a open-ended amount in there somewhere?
That would go through the special event permitting process at that point, and additional fees may be assessed.
Okay, and so that was my second question. So for the special permit, I might have just plain missed it in here. Do we have set fees that are related to special permits, or that's just reviewed on a case-by-case basis?
There is a set fee for that, for the application in the city clerk or in the town clerk fees, but there's also language in there that allows for providing extra fees as needed based on the event.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure we weren't unintentionally missing those larger gatherings. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions on those particular fees?
I didn't spend a lot of time looking at these fees. I recall that we had for the purpose of the budget, there is some nominal revenue that comes from these fees, but it doesn't, no disrespect, it doesn't move the needle compared to anything else. We could spend a tremendous amount of time talking about this, and I will have more questions, but if we approve the budget, which we obviously will in the next few weeks, is there anything there's nothing that prohibits us from talking about whether or not it's, 1 to 35 changes to 1 to 50? I mean, didn't we do that in previous years off budget cycle, or am I misremembering? Let me ask the question again. Don't we review the fees off budget cycle is my question, and not necessarily within the budget on a line item basis?
Paul, I'll have to refer to you for that.
I think we've done both, Kevin, to be honest. So, this fee schedule, which will be adopted as part of the budget, doesn't preclude us, obviously, from talking about it. And then potentially, if the board elects to, we could make modifications to it. So it's not set in stone. It's something that just would require an additional approval by the board.
Okay.
I think we were considering additional fees when we had outside groups that were using our parks. If I recall, when we had a really low rate, so we had people from outside of Superior that were very often reserving Community Park, Purple Park for events, and we wanted to, I guess, discourage that behavior and incentivize the reservation of the parks for Superior residents. And I think we did that off budget cycle, Kevin.
Yeah, I just have, so the aquatics in particular, right? So and maybe I should probably know, because if I'm a flyer family, I got an email from an outside group that we could swim inside, within the pools, but then you have to join, it wasn't Flyers related. It was the swim club that we rent to for the fall. And the fees were through the roof. I mean, it was, I couldn't believe how high it was. And so I'm trying to reconcile the fact that we have residents who are being solicited, which is fine. I don't mind solicitation emails, to participate in a pool, yet I suspect that the pool rental for that outside group does not cover the heating costs if the flyers are not also going to swim. So I was just trying to reconcile that, and I wanted to think about the pool rental and do some analysis, and I've got some spreadsheets that I've done in the past. And I just don't want this to be the exhaustive conversation. You know, the last conversation we talked about pool rental for 2021.
And I don't think it needs to be, Kevin. And Jeff, if you'll roll down to that next sheet that will kind of reference, I think, what Kevin is starting to talk about as it relates to the, you know, evening pool rental and the off-season north pool rental, you know, those particular items. I mean, that is what is currently in the fee schedule. And, you know, the board has obviously can discuss that anytime they like. But the proposed schedule that would be adopted as part of the budget is what you're seeing in front of you.
Okay, I guess I'll jump in and keep going if that's okay with everybody. Those increases to the non-resident pool rental rates are really to bring the pool fees consistent with other fees where non-residents are paying basically 3 times the amount that a resident would pay. The changes to the resident rate were basically just to adjust fees to cover our out-of-pocket costs as those go up each year. And those are minimal.
Leslie, do we have data like for 2018 and 19 in terms of the people who rented the pool? You know, how many of them were residents versus non-residents?
Sure, I can dig that up. I can at least go back to last year. So we switched our software program. I am not 100% sure we can dig back past 2000.
No, I mean, even just directionally, is it 1/3 is out of town and the other 2/3 is in town, just for sake of my own benefit?
I can look that up and get that to you.
Cool, thanks.
Leslie, the other thing I'd be curious about for both the pools and the broader park facility rentals, did we, and I don't necessarily need numbers on this, but just broadly, did we see an uptick in requests for those reservations this summer due to COVID?
I don't think we did because we were not accepting out of town utilization of the pools due to the Boulder County restrictions.
And sorry, I mean more, not for the pools, but for the shelters and such. Did we see an uptick in either residents or non-residents requesting reservations of those shelters?
No, we actually saw a decrease because, again, we were not reserving those for gatherings. So to not encourage gatherings, we're utilizing those as just drop-in for people who are in the park and need a place to rest or get out of the sun, but not allowing those reservations so that we're not encouraging the gatherings.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Changes to pool guest fees. You can see we eliminated the ID card fee for the pools since everything is now being handled through our software and on your phone. So that's going to remain a no charge going forward. And then I made some slight adjustments to those other program fees, which really were more directed towards special events and fees associated with special events. Rather than call out each event by name, is to allow for a range of fees that would be appropriate for all of our events that are currently on the books or that might be future events that we haven't developed yet. So changing those to more of a range. You can go ahead and scroll down. Okay, these are all the new fees for 1500 Colton. These were largely based on our surrounding communities for the non-resident business rate. And then we stuck with the same philosophy of residents paying basically 1/3 that fee. It's nominal, it doesn't cover out-of-pocket costs, but it is a typical subsidy rate for those types of services that we're offering, basically room rentals. There is a correction, a couple corrections actually. The initial document you had the boardroom, I believe, at $20 per player, and obviously that was a typo, so it's $20 per hour. Also, the very last fee of entire facility campus had a typo in there. It should have said $400 an hour for a resident to rent the whole campus, or $1,200 for a non-resident.
And presumably at some point it's going to be defined, you know, if the business is a business, it pays the business rate. If the business is owned by a Superior resident, it's still a business, presumably, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And it would be, you know, for business purposes. So, yeah. The last line under
Wait, what?
that blue box that says beer and wine permits, that actually is going to be removed. I just recently heard from our attorneys that we can't really take that approach for beer and wine permits to be separate from alcohol permits. So I'll explain that as we go down through these guiding principles.
So I'll just make an observation on the fees here. And yeah, it wasn't player, I think it was per field.
Okay, thank you.
I actually think I almost think some of these you could add a 0 to, you know. I'm not ready to, you know, having the building not yet complete. It's, you know, it's obviously, you know, we don't know what the furniture is going to look like. We don't know what the demand looks like. You know, I'm not sure I'm inclined to kind of publish. Personally, I'm not sure I'd be inclined to publish the fees. I feel like I need to look at that a little bit more. You know, when I look at, for example, the entire facility, the campus, you know, at $400, I'll tell you right now, that's, you know, we could, I mean, for graduation purposes, you know, for graduation parties, that thing's going to be sold out if it's only $400 an hour, right? I mean, there's no way it should only be $400 an hour for the entire campus, in my view. So I just want to think about it a little bit more. I really appreciate this first stab, but I'd suggest that since we're not going to have the lights on there before the spring, we've got some time to noodle over this one. And it'd be excluded, you know, with a big TBD or draft or something for now.
Leslie, we're right at 2:00 and we've got Sheriff Pelley kind of on deck. Is it possible if we can just kind of put a placeholder on this and come back once we've heard from Sheriff Pelley and his staff?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great.
So Jeff, if you can get us to, we're going to jump into one of the detailed documents in the PDF. It's actually, I think, page 141. But I know this is a little bit mind-numbing, so we won't try to overwhelm you here. But what we wanted to talk about is we have the public safety budget beginning on what's noted as line 113. That's essentially our contract with Boulder County Sheriff. You'll see from this year's budget, so line 123, this year's budget is 1.929 million. We're proposing in 2021 the budget increase of what is that? Just, you know, $30,000 to 1.96 million. No staffing increases. We're looking at small inflationary increase for the contract from the sheriff. The other big components of this budget is our share of dispatch services, and those stay pretty consistent from year to year. And then we just have some innocuous operating expenses. So really no, I think, level of service changes materially with this budget. I do want to note, though, before the sheriff jumps on and his staff jump on, that for the 5-year plan, we had identified that we are looking at adding a deputy in 2022. So you will see that in the budget document when you look at line 114, that law enforcement services under 2022 budget, that's 1.95 million, or an increase of, almost $200,000, which represents that new staff member. So just from a budget perspective, this year, 2020 to 2021, not any material increases. Matt, do you have any other comments on the budget before Sheriff Pelley and his command staff address the board?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that from a staff perspective, we continue to be satisfied with partnership with the sheriff's office and continue to get great service from the sheriff's office, and appreciate them being in town and being a partner with us.
Just a quick question to Paul and Matt. I mean, also in the budget is an expansion of town hall. And I think written in there is that we would move the sheriff into the town hall, but this budget over here continues to have utilities and rent.
Yeah.
Just something to sort out, after this, but I just want to be consistent that we're not continuing to rent the space, in Brixmore in addition to town
Right.
hall being
Yeah.
expanded.
Yeah, we had discussions since then, and I think the direction and discussion has been for the sheriff's office to stay where they're currently located.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Sheriff Pelley, I think the floor is now yours for you and your staff. We have all 6, we've got the mayor and the remaining 5 trustees on this call as well.
Thanks. Yeah, there's not a lot of big budget changes here. We had a kind of estimating a 3% kind of cost of living or merit increase. I think that may be a very safe number, actually, according to what we're hearing from the county in regards to what, the potential pay increases for our employees. So I think that's very safe. It may be less than that. One of the things I'm going to note is on directed traffic enforcement, and in general, just sort of a general description of our health right now. We are currently down 20 deputies in our operations division. People are leaving this career right now. They're not going to other departments. They're getting out of the business. And we are having a hard time filling those overtime hours for directed traffic enforcement. I hope and pray the situation will correct itself and that the bleeding will stop. But it just has a lot to do with the current environment, COVID, anti-police sentiment, just a lot of negativity around this as a career, and we're struggling with filling those hours and attracting new people and getting good applicants right now. Again, I hope this corrects itself soon. Questions?
I've got one question. Thank you for joining us for the meeting today. And this is more of just a anecdotal and observational thing that I've been seeing just in conversations with our residents and postings on social media. I think anecdotally we're seeing possibly an uptick in crimes of opportunity here in Superior, and from what I can tell, most of it is related to probably just poor decisions by some of our residents, leaving keys in the car and their cars being stolen, or leaving garage doors open or something like that. Overall, is there a public outreach program that you do to try to or that you can recommend for us to implement with our staff, or that you all can help with? I mean, I imagine that if we can raise the bar higher for thieves, because right now by not protecting ourselves, we're an easy target. So we see the same people coming back and taking advantage of our residents. if we can raise that bar and have them be less successful, I imagine they'll move on to what would be greener pastures for them. Is there any way that you have had success doing that, or that we should be working to implement something to address that?
Yeah, so we have a wonderful young lady, Carrie Haverfield, who does our social media stuff, and we use a program called Neighbors, and in doing kind of organizing neighborhoods and sharing information about crime and upticks. We have seen this year, since March, we've seen about a 30% increase in auto thefts and auto prowls, people breaking into cars. That's not just Superior, that's countywide, all the communities. And so there's for some reason, there's a lot of that going on right now. And we certainly could help the town reach out to the residents. I can have Carrie work with Troy around that messaging, and with Matt and the town staff to see what we want to put out there. But we do have the tools and the people to help with that. And you guys obviously have contact information. I guess the decision is how do we decide to use that?
Yeah, and I'll leave that to Matt and your team to do, but that sounds great, and I appreciate that service is out there, and hope that we can make it less attractive for thieves to come in here and take advantage of our residents. So thank you.
You guys are unfortunately right on the edge of that, that West Metro, Westminster, Thornton. There's just a lot of activity, and Superior just sort of seems to be right on the edge of picking a lot of that up.
Right.
So a couple follow-up questions. I hadn't seen this. The 30% increase is the first I've heard that number. Is that countywide, or is that Superior related, or is that anecdotal, or is that based on the data?
It's countywide. So what we were doing earlier this month, we were trying to take a look at crime in general in Boulder County and compare the COVID period, the restrictions on jail intakes, the effect that stay-at-home order has had, and all that. We're trying to look at what that meant as far as crime goes. So the district attorney's office actually undertook this. They looked at the same period last year and compared it to this 3-month period. There's been an uptick in a slight uptick in domestic violence, and then a general downturn in a lot of other crime, but this big increase in auto theft, and that's actually going on across the entire metro area as well, from what I can tell.
Well, interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I had not heard that. We received I've now been on the board for 4 years, probably received, 10,000 emails or more. I've never received a single email suggesting something that was suggested by a resident this week, which was, hey, Superior is not big enough for, or, instead of having a dependency around Boulder County Sheriff, we're big enough for our own police department. I personally responded to that saying, I don't see any need for it. I think we're getting great service from Boulder County Sheriff, and this is from a fiscal perspective. I think it's probably, we'd spend 3 to 5 times more, I think is what I estimated, 3 to 5 times more if we were to build our own infrastructure to replicate what you bring through Boulder County Sheriff. Is that, I know you have a couple substations, and by no means is anybody on the board advocating for this, but it was an email that we received. I pushed back relatively hard and suggested a phone call, and I'm sure Troy would love to get on the phone with me if necessary to talk to that resident. But is this a trend you're seeing in Lyons or any other places where you're operating substations? It's the first time I'd heard of it.
No, actually, the trend, and it's a national trend, the trend's the opposite. The trend is to contract. I just read an article a few months ago. Now 30% of the municipalities in the state of California are contracting because of the efficiencies of that. The efficiency obviously comes in not replicating fleet maintenance and overhead and facilities and all that. So if you're happy with the level of control that you have, and that you're happy with branding and response. I think one of the things that we do that helps this model is the assignment of a sergeant to your town on a long-term basis to sort of act as your police chief and to be your local face, to attend your town meetings, listen to your residents, work with the board of trustees on priorities. And I think as long as a municipality has a level of input and control as to how they're being policed, this is a much more efficient way to accomplish that than trying to start your own police department.
I agree.
I wrote an article several years ago, and it's been published by the Colorado Municipal League, and it's available on their website, or it was, but it's fairly in-depth, and it goes into all of the efficiencies around this. It may be a good point of reference for you to use when people have questions like that. I'm pretty sure it's in my documents. If you need it, I can find it and get it to Matt.
We have a few terabytes of data we're reviewing, so if Matt could maybe put that on top of the terabytes, that'd be helpful. But that's a great response, and yeah, we absolutely agree. Do you agree? You know, I think if we were trying to do this on our own, it would be 3 to 5 times more expensive, and we'd have degraded service. Does that ring true to?
So the issue right now for small agencies is recruiting and retention of staff,
Yeah.
and meeting if you're trying to run a 10 or 12 person police department and you're having the turnover that we're having, you're going to have difficulty staffing shifts, covering days, meeting the minimum training requirements that the state has, all of those things. And you know, we worked with the town of Lyons, and now we're working with the town of Nederland on a contract as well, because they can't do nighttime coverage. They just can't hire people. But Nederland's a great example where they have a couple of police cars, and when one breaks down, they're stuck. You know, where we have 100 cars. If your car breaks down, we send one over. If your cop goes out on long-term medical leave or even maternity for a period of time, we'll send somebody over. You can't do that with a 10 or 12 person department. You don't have that depth on the bench, and that's what we can bring you.
Great. This will be my last question, I promise. I asked this question, I think, last year or a couple years ago, but it may be more important now because if you've seen people leave the field, my understanding, you guys are hiring. My understanding is there is no age restriction, and so somebody that's looking for that second career could, assuming they're qualified and meet your physical requirements and everything else. You want a quick commercial for kind of the advantage of being a deputy within Boulder County Sheriff?
Well, it's a great place to work with good pay and good benefits and a great team atmosphere. You know, we just did an internal assessment with the county, and where we scored off the charts was the level of team, the feeling of teams. People like working here and with each other. They like their work group, and they get a lot out of that. So yeah, we've had some great hires. We are currently struggling, I got to tell you, to recruit people, and every police agency in the country is facing this dilemma right now because of just because of the sentiment and the issues going on across the country.
Matt, it might be good for us to have a link maybe on our page to, when we're looking for a parks technician, we put it right on the splash page. I can't think of anything more important than supporting the sheriff and hiring people. So maybe we could do the same as if we're, hiring for them.
We just put together a great recruiting video, and we thought we'd do some poaching. And so we hit social media hard in Seattle, Portland, Chicago, St. Louis. We thought there's certainly peace officers in those locations looking for a great place to go. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten any interest.
Sheriff, we appreciate you being on the meeting today, and maybe you could introduce your team that you've got with you. I know we've got Sergeant Wolf, who's representing here in Superior, and I see Chief Wolf, who have not met, so maybe you could just introduce the team.
So Chief Troy Wolf is actually Division Chief Bob Sullenberger, Sully. Troy's not here. Troy's dad passed away, and the only available time for the family to have a memorial service was today. So they're there. I don't know why Sully has Troy's name on his.
I'm a baby boomer. I can't figure it out.
And Brian Jones is the commander in Operations Division, and he helps take care of and track all of our administrative stuff, including this contract.
Okay, welcome, all of you. Thank you.
I have one question for Sheriff Pelley, insofar as it concerns the budget that we're reviewing today. I don't have any specific questions with respect to the line items for law enforcement, but there's a request for the expansion of Town Hall, and I wanted you to weigh in on how you feel about that, how your current space is working out, and if you have any position one way or the other on our consideration of, you know, an investment from a capital investment perspective on expanding Town Hall to include your services within Town Hall.
Well, so I haven't had any complaints about the space that we're in right now. I don't know if Sully or Brian has. You know, one of the things that is nice about having us at Town Hall is visibility and accessibility and one-stop shopping for residents. That could all be a beneficial thing. And whether you're contracting with the sheriff's office in the future or you have your own police department, I think you're gonna need to plan for and have space, obviously, for policing, public safety in the future. So it really is just a decision you all need to make. It doesn't matter to us whether we're in rented space or town-owned space. The decision may be more financial than anything else. But again, the benefits would be visibility and that sort of one-stop shopping aspect that having something at Town Hall could bring.
I could weigh in a little bit with the remodel that's going on at our substation now. The team is actually very pleased with that. And I pair it back with Sheriff was saying, if you're expanding your Town Hall, it makes a whole lot of sense to bring your police department into the same venue. But we're very happy with where we're at.
Good, that's good to hear. Thank you.
Okay, anyone have anything else? All right, again, Sheriff, thank you for being on the meeting. We appreciate you and your entire team and all the great service that you provide for us. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, we will transition now back to Leslie with park fees.
Thank you. I'll try and wrap this up fairly quickly. The last part of fees and charges is really the guiding principles for our fees and charges. Just to explain how we go about estimating those and coming up with those. We look at out-of-pocket costs. We benchmark with neighboring cities. The non-resident rate, as I said, we made some adjustments to make that consistent across the board, that it's 3 times the rate for non-residents than residents for pretty much all services. The extra fees for larger gatherings is kind of called out there. The next 2 blocks of text, permits may be issued for beer and wine only. I just found out that we cannot do that according to state statute and our the way we're organized as a statutory town. So we can adjust how we do insurance requirements for smaller groups if we want to, but we still have to go through the special permit if we want to issue an alcohol permit. So an alcohol permit is an alcohol permit. So that block of text we can just take out for now, and the one right below it, consumption of beer and wine will take place with, that can also be removed because that was related to creating a separate permit, which I found out we're not able to do. We can, as I said, adjust our insurance requirements, but the process will still be the same as it has been in the past, where people will have to apply for that special use permit to be allowed to have alcohol in the parks. The only other option would be to designate certain locations where consumption is allowable, but then there's no fee attached to it, no permit attached to it. And I don't think that we were interested in going in that direction. So we'll get that corrected and get those two things removed. And then the last bullet point, just calling out that events in excess of 150 would require that special event permit through the town clerk. I did find out, to answer Trustee Shaw's question, I believe, on percentage of rentals that were from non-residents for 2018 and 2019, we had none, 0. So we have effectively priced them out of the rental, evening rental of pools, or it simply isn't available because the residents have taken up all the slots.
And that was at the old rates, anywhere from 100 to 130 an hour.
Correct.
Okay.
We did not have any participation. And I suspect it's a fairly popular activity and that we get quite a few residents who take advantage of that.
No, I think that's great. Perfect.
Great. Thank you, Leslie, for your overview. We're going to move on from fee schedule unless there are any additional comments from the board. So I think where we're going to go next, I'm going to try not to have you be too dizzy by this, is actually into the Excel budget documents. For those of you looking on your PDF, I think that'll start on page 137. And generally how this document works is it identifies all our cost centers or all our funds effectively. And we'll speak to some revenues, we'll speak to some changes in operating expenses, but really we'll have staff focus on upcoming next year budget 2021, unless there's something they think they need to address in the out years. Most of the focus is going to be on next year's budget, and this is not going to be a line by line review, but instead, just again, generally a big picture. But this would be a great time as we're going through this to ask very specific questions. You'll see in the document that Jeff just pulled up that similar to last year, between when you received the document a few weeks ago and now, we've actually made some changes, and those are highlighted in yellow. There are not too many of them, but we'll call those out. And as we make changes, obviously as part of the board's review, we'll highlight those in the final document so you can see we've in fact done that. But first, so what we're looking at now is what we call our general fund budget, and we'll look at revenues. And I'll be very brief because I think the overview got into some of this, but the one highlighted item that you see there is vehicle use tax, or taxes associated when you purchase a new vehicle. We had seen a precipitous drop in that during the first few months of COVID, from March, April, May, June timeframe. But then we've seen over the last 2 or 3 months, the traditional V-shaped recovery. So we feel confident that that particular revenue source is not going to drop as much as we initially had anticipated. So I think the initial budget document showed that line at roughly $575,000, and we can conservatively say with some level of flexibility that we should get up to $250,000 in the general fund. And that revenue source will also positively impact our capital budget and our open space budget, not to the same order of magnitude that we're seeing here, but you'll see some additional vehicle use tax revenues in those operations as well when we get to that.
Paul, just a quick question. Just I think the cover memo or page 5 of the budget book, talked about 2020 projections are coming in 12% above 2019 actuals, and I was trying to find that here, and I can't find it. Right? If you look at your column R, your 11.4 million, which is basically flat to the budget number. Because at a 12% increase, we should see an extra million and a half. And I'm trying to reconcile the statement in the book with what's in the spreadsheet.
Right, and it's very difficult to do so. So when we look at a 12% increase for sales tax increase, that's on a total basis. Total sales tax received this year, we're anticipating going to be 12% higher than last year. And then what happens within that sales tax revenue, which within each one of these budgets, it's somewhat unique to each budget. Not all the budgets have sales tax revenues. And those budgets that do have sales tax revenues, you can see, for example, on line 16, we differentiate between sales that come from outside the marketplace, or what we call non-SURA. So this would be around the Safeway area predominantly. Then we have other sales within the marketplace revenue. And then we even have sales within what we call the Louisville revenue share area. So it's an amalgamation really of all 3 of those lines in a myriad of different funds that total up to this 12% increase. But I mean, generally to show, I think an increase that we're seeing here is that on that sales non-SURA line where we had budgeted in 2020 in column Q $2 million, and we're actually estimating closer to $3 million. And then that line will obviously drop back in future years. What we have going there, for example, is the initial budget in 2020 of $2 million was low because the column to the left of that, 2019 actually, you see $2.3 million, and that was associated with at the last few months of the year just pouring in of internet sales. But generally you'll see in that particular line a material increase in revenues, in that case over 12%. But as we look at it holistically between all those different types of sales tax and the different funds, that's where we get the 12%. So I'm sorry, a very long answer, Neil, to your question.
No, I think that's perfect. No, and I think it's key because sales tax may have gone up, but I think as you already spoke to, vehicle use taxes are down and permits and fees are down. So in the aggregate, I get it. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So, I don't really have any additional comments on sales tax. We'll see a spike, we're proposing this year. And, to a large degree, who knows when the spike is going to stop? To some degree is we need to get COVID shots rolled out to 330 million people. That'll help to moderate economy getting back to where it needs to be. But it'll be anyone's guess, obviously, on when we return to some level of normalcy here. So generally, we're anticipating an abnormal fiscal year this year, dropping down to more routine levels of revenue receipts. But we'll obviously have to continue to monitor that. But that's the general premise that we're working under. The only other comments I think I want to make on the revenue side, and Neil hit on those, is for our building related revenues, that would be that building use line on line 22, where we had budgeted $250,000. That is going to be something less than that this year. And this is a similar dialogue that we had last year. We had anticipated that actually one of our larger residential developments would be further along than it is. This would be the Superior Shores development near the Broomfield Mall. That, as you all know now, they're moving dirt out there. They're doing infrastructure work, but they won't be pulling building permits and paying for those building permits until next year. So that's the primary reason why we're seeing a drop in estimated revenue over the budgets. But what that impacts is not only a revenue decrease, but then since we contract our inspection services when we get to the actual expenses associated with building expenses, those will be conversely down this year as well. So no other comments that I really have either under the taxes line or the license and permits line, unless the board members have any specific questions there. Under charges for services, the primary revenue source there is line 42, which we call administrative fees. So what these revenues represent, and for the 2021 budget, the number I'm looking at in column T is $1.137 million. These are staff salaries that we allocate to our other cost centers, primarily to our utility operations. So we will see expenses in our water fund, in our sewer fund, in our storm fund, and these are the revenues that reimburse the general fund for Alex and his staff time, for the manager's office, for my time associated with those particular projects. So that's a consistent item year to year in the budget, but it may look a little bit abnormal. Then what we've seen with our rec programs, as Leslie I think alluded to, is a lot of our fees, which Kevin noted, are not necessarily material related to rec programs. For example, line 49, we have budgeted $30,000 this year for rec programs. Because of COVID and not doing those programs, we're not generating the revenue. But conversely, Leslie will show you on her expense side, we don't have the expenses approaching budgets this year either. But then we're looking at getting back to more traditional levels in the out years. Leslie, do you have any other comments on maybe some of your charges for services there?
Just to note that the increases are really reflective of bringing 1500 Colton Road online. So an increase in facility use fees and an increase in recreation programming based on activity there. So it is just an estimate at this point. Hopefully we'll be busy out there.
Yeah, and hopefully then some of those revenues that Leslie alluded to, those will be intended to help offset some of the new incremental operating expenses, primarily part-time labor to staff that facility and staff those particular programs.
So a related question I had, kind of provided a perfect segue, is I noted when looking through the general fund expenditures, many of those increases in operating costs for 1500 Colton Road. I know that the intent is that we bring somebody in to potentially operate the cafe / bar area that we have in there, and that there might be a lease in there or something. Do we have any type of revenue built in to the budget related to that?
We really don't. I guess my recommendation is until that comes to fruition, we should probably be somewhat conservative on a revenue perspective from that.
Okay, but just to confirm, and maybe Matt, this is a question to you, we are actively working on that, and it is expected to have somebody in there to play that role, correct?
That's correct. We are working on that, and Better Cities had a couple of meetings that I've been involved with potential operators. So that's the plan, but I agree with Paul. It's better to be conservative and leave the revenue out for now.
Okay, perfect. Just ballpark, just for back in my mind, do we have any idea what that revenue might be, or is that still too early to even have that conversation?
Yeah, I think it's still too early.
Okay. Thank you.
You'll see the next big revenue category beginning on line 61 is called fines and forfeitures, which are exclusively court revenue. And I think that's associated with some degree what Sheriff Pelley was talking about. And Martin, I don't know if you have any additional comments here, but we had budgeted $205,000. We're anticipating that to be materially lower because of the issuance of citations, I think, is materially lower, and then we're gradually looking for that to ramp back up. Martin, any other comments from you on that?
No, Paul, that's about it.
And then, thank you, Martin. And then miscellaneous revenue is, again, a small piece of the pie, predominantly interest earnings. And obviously in this environment, we're not going to generate, any material interest earnings on any of our, $30 to $40 million portfolio. So any specifics, so before we then jump into what we will call the general fund operating budget, any specific questions or follow-up from the board on any revenue questions? And you'll see generally that, revenue from budget to budget, we're looking at, again, line 79, column Q, 2020 budgets at 19 or 13.9. We're estimating a little bit less is going to come in because primarily of some of that billing activity not meeting our expectations, and then jumping a little bit above 14 million next year. But obviously, a lot of that is going to be driven by what happens from a kind of a macroeconomic standpoint here in the United States.
Just a question on the forecast for the fines and forfeitures. Obviously, it's down for 2020 because a lot of people weren't driving. But why the dip? I mean, it's still really low in 2021. It's just like you said. Is this just part of the sort of assumed V recovery?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. Just kind of the gradual uptick, and hopefully Sheriff Pelley will get to the point where you won't have these, some of these critical staffing shortages that will then allow some of the staff to look at extra duty here within time. We have a line in for roughly $50,000 that Sheriff Pelley staff can do extra duty and extra traffic enforcement, and associated with that is, occasionally some additional tickets being written. That sound right, Martin?
Yeah, Paul, that's exactly right. Matt and I both had a chance to sit down and chat with Sergeant Wolf and talk about how they're working to ramp up, as they have added some staff into their academy program over the next few months, that they'll be able to find some folks who can help take on some of that additional collateral duty assignment. And then we'll plan to have this ramp back up after the start of the year. But yes, that's exactly the plan.
Thank you, Martin. Anything else from the board before we transition over to the expense side?
So Paul, I do have one more question, and this brings back to my statement earlier. Since we are talking on the revenue side, and looking at our mill levy for our property taxes, if the board were to make the decision to no longer implement a credit and collect the full amount of authorized mills, how would that impact our immediate, both this upcoming year and maybe the next year or two? Or would we initially just pull some projects forward, or would staff start increasing some of our reserves, or what if we were to do that so we could start planning the out years? What would that immediately mean to our budget?
Well, we haven't, so what Jeff rolled up to the top of that document, and where we're looking at our lines, line 9 essentially, so that 7.93 figure is our mill levy, which generates line 12 revenues of that $1.88 million figure. Since we've had no discussion necessarily on the projects, and if the board elected to increase that mill levy, so what the process is we would certify that with the county in December. That would be potentially part of next year's property tax bill. And additional cash would roll in. And, if that's something the board would want to do, we would have the cash rolling in. We would just, reserve that designated, not spend it until a point in time where the board had determined what their spending priorities would be.
Along those same lines, though, the board can make the decision right now to drop the reserve. We're at 75%. It's almost $8 million. We can drop that to 6 and, knock off a huge part of that sort of deferred backlog the same way.
Yes, that is totally under the board's discretion. And, and again, for maybe the viewing public, we have reserve requirements in all of our operations, and in the general fund, it's, as Neil has noted, it's 75% or roughly $8 million. And the intent of that particular reserve is a recognition that we are so dependent upon sales tax, and our sales tax is generated by so few large vendors that if there was a disruption in that particular revenue source, we would have, you know, some cash in reserve to adjust. But that's part of that discussion. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate the context.
So then on to general fund expenses. And here we will let each department head, you know, briefly highlight anything they feel relevant to highlight in their budget areas. So we'll start first with legislative for any comments from Matt or Martin there.
So the biggest change here is reflects the vote of the board to increase compensation that'll be effective for part of the board after the November election for 3 board members. So you start to see those increases in the 21 budget and then on through the 5-year planning budget. That has an impact on FICA as well. No other big highlights from this fund.
We had the compensation question, Matt. I meant to ask this question, I didn't. Have we ever investigated deferred compensation for the board members?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Oh, my next time, I don't know who we even use for payroll, but I wouldn't mind just if it's remotely possible to have that deferred comp conversation. It may actually help. It may help recruit future trustees if they had the ability for deferred comp. It may help our cash position if somebody chose a deferred comp. And so I just don't know what our position is.
Kevin, can you clarify what you mean? Because I'm assuming you mean kind of trustees don't get paid until end of the year or every 2 years, but maybe I'm misunderstanding. But
so deferred comp. No, so deferred. If I chose at my employer to defer 10% of my compensation, then I have options. I could either take it 7 years from now upon retirement or at a age. And then my employer, through presumably collaboration with their HR vendor, gets to keep that cash. I agree to some interest rate, you know, usually pretty low, so call it somewhere, you know, in the 2 to 3% category. And it's a win-win for all parties. The risk to the employer to take a deferred comp is that entity you accepted deferred compensation from better be there at some point in the future. A lot of people
right.
Lost. But you're obviously deferring the compensation, so it does not go into your adjusted gross income for that particular year.
Yep. Thank you. I follow now.
So Matt, it does move the budget, but it's on my list. And since we talked about board comp, it's by no means urgent, but at some point, if it's possible to have, I'm not suggesting we get healthcare. I personally, my favorite perk is the bus pass. Not that we use it these days, but that is my favorite perk. But it would be interesting if there are other things that wouldn't cost the town very much money that might make the job of being a trustee a little bit more attractive.
I think it's a good suggestion, Kevin. And frankly, like I recall we did have a discussion, or at least an informal one, about the possibility of healthcare. And I think that if we're going to have a discussion about something like deferred comp, we should also have the discussion about benefits as well. You know, I think for people who are maybe retired or something like that, and you know, that could be a lure for, you know, public service. That is something that's worth talking about and understanding what the financial consequences would be to the town.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Any other questions on legislative?
Can I see any, where do we have current, this is not where our lobbyist would be, right? We have,
Yeah, it is. Yep. Let's see. Is under
right there.
Yep.
And what is this is, I believe, a couple different elements. What are,
Yeah, we have the Metro Community Solutions and the Metro Mayors Coalition takes a trip out to Washington, D.C. every year for lobbying. So we have a lobbyist out in Washington, D.C. for federal legislation that affects the Boulder County area and all municipalities within it. We have 5,000 in there for a state lobbyist in case there's an issue that we want to hire somebody for any given year on an issue. And then we have, let's see, what else? I think those are the two primary lobbying efforts that we have in there for right now.
okay. We do not currently have, I know historically, ages ago, we hired a state lobbyist to help with the connection, the 470 connection. We don't currently have anybody, correct?
No, that's correct. That's depending on the issue, we would hire somebody if the board directed for that particular issue, and that lobbyist could change depending on the issue.
Okay. And lobbying is one, you obviously have discretion, but we would not hire a lobbyist at any expense without going to the board, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So I'll go with that line item. Thank you.
Okay. On judicial, this is pretty much status quo. These expenses, we did have a minor increase for the municipal court judge compensation, but that was really the largest change in the judicial. Any questions on judicial?
Hey, actually, just an aggregate question, and this is top to bottom, so it's for Paul and Matt. And I know you've sort of assumed a 3%, sort of salary increase across the board. Can you just walk us through the logic on that? Because, on one hand, obviously, we want to reward employees, keep them on. They've been working really hard. On the other hand, you've got Boulder that's publicly said you're keeping things flat, and they're just trying to keep the people they have because they'd have to lay off a huge amount of their staff. And I know that you're targeting a 0 to 6. But just kind of walk us through the rationale on 3% relative to where COLA is, single digits, or fractions of a digit.
Yeah, I'll let Paul cover that. And just, you're exactly right. It is 0 to 6%. So it is merit-based. So it's a performance-based increase. So not everybody's going to, necessarily get a 3% increase. Some may get more and some may get less. But I'll let Paul cover how we came to the recommendation of 3%.
So we'll look at a number of factors, and you're all reading the same documents I'm reading. As it relates to many municipalities are looking at 0% or something slightly higher than that. In Boulder's particular case, Neil, that you brought up, they're talking about 0% increase, but then said, oh, by the way, we have some contractual obligations. And the cop shop, they get their contractual increase of 3.5%. And I think there was even some reference that the manager there wanted to set aside some funds if in case, finances rebounded to be able to pay folks. But when you're reading these articles, just remember that when we talk about 3%, that's our all-in costs. That's for COLA adjustments and STEP and longevity, and many other municipalities will bifurcate or they'll differentiate their pay increases. And they'll say that, oh no, nobody's going to get a cost of living increase, but they may not tell you that there are either contractually obligated through union negotiations or others, required step increases. So if you have another year under your belt at your municipality, you will automatically get a step increase, but that's not how we operate here. Another way that we look at it, as well as we do an annual salary survey and ensure that our ranges for our positions, the salary ranges, are in line with our competitors. And what we found this year, for example, that of the 33 positions, 10 of the ranges, the salary ranges from whatever it may be, individual with no experience in a position will be at the bottom of the salary range. So you have 50,000. So your range is $50,000 to $80,000. $50,000 for an entry level position, 80,000 for seasoned positions. But those ranges we found this year, 28% of them within the town, or 10 out of our 35 positions, are under the salary ranges of our competitors. So that goes into the calculus as well, that we, ultimately long-term need to be competitive with our ranges as well as our salaries. So this is not necessarily scientific. It's a little bit squishy, but between those 28% of salary ranges of our positions being kind of under our industry norm, combined by the fact that we are proposing a modest, what I consider somewhat modest, perhaps more than some of our neighboring municipalities on 3%. That's generally how we landed there.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, if it was science-based, this would be very easy, but it's not. So no, I appreciate the dialogue, because I'm okay with that. I think it's consistent and it makes sense. And I wasn't aware that Boulder is potentially looking at a way to add back if things rebound. That's actually some really good contextual information. Sorry, Matt, I didn't mean to sidetrack you on the judicial section, but I thought a conversation about the salaries and the increases is probably relevant.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and you'll see it in the rest of the department budgets coming up as far as salary and that 3%. So it was a good question. Any other questions?
My question on this page was the archive. Are we going to be? I asked this last year. Are we going to be done with the archiving this year?
We are not. It'll be continue into next year. With the pandemic earlier in the year, nobody was taking anything from anybody just because of safety reasons. But we've started that back up, but it won't be done this year.
All right. So we had thought we'd be. So we thought we were going to be done this year, correct?
That was the plan. Yep.
Well, I think most of the archiving, I think, takes place under the clerk's budget, line 47. And I thought we had even talked about trying to get half of that done this year, $35,000 budgeted, and then another $35,000 budgeted in 2021.
Yeah, I'd be all about accelerating that. I mean, it's a big line item, guys, and frankly, we've struggled as a municipality to have easy access. At least I have to have easy access to documents. So that would be anything we could do to accelerate. Sorry. Hello?
Any other questions?
Okay, so I think we have Phyllis next for clerk. Any comments, Phyllis?
Not too many. Trustee Ryan did hit on the archiving, so I won't go into that. We have sent out the first batch, which they are doing. So it will depend on where that one goes. The codification, that all depends. You can see for 2020, it was less than the 3,000 budgeted, not by much, but we never know what that will be depending on what ordinances are passed and what needs to be codified in the town code. Elections, that's only, every other year. So other than that, I think everything else stays pretty much the same, unless you have any questions.
Phyllis, I have one question. So maybe I'm just missing it here. Where are our open records requests rolled up into?
Probably other fees and services. There is not a line item for open records request.
Okay, the $500 that's in there seems low to me. Paul, is that where we would roll that up into?
And what line are we looking at for clarification?
Let's see, I was looking at
56.
Oh, sorry, line 56. 2020 budget 500. I mean, I know we've had a steady stream of open records requests that seem pretty long, and I assume that they would just that between. I guess maybe it's our legal fees because a lot of that is Kendra reviewing that. Is that where those costs are getting captured then?
Yeah, those costs are going to be, they're going to be Phyllis, doing the work, making copies, maybe Kendra getting involved. So if there are any incremental expenses, it may show up under legal fees, but we don't necessarily have a activity code or cost center where we track those. And then the revenues, as I think Phyllis said, they'll just come in their general fund miscellaneous revenues, but we don't have a specific cost center to track those.
Okay.
Just one point. So even if it takes Kendra's office 2 hours to do the redacting of the emails, we can only charge $33.58 per hour. So,
right,
and or answer.
No, that actually is the basis of my question. I was trying to get a better feeling for where our delta is between what we can collect and how much we spend on it. That way I can just trying to get a better idea of how what the magnitude is of the open record requests are in budget. I mean, I know it's still fairly small in the grand scheme of things, but we're just trying to get a better idea on that.
Ken, we'll look into that and try to quantify it. No promises, but we'll do our best.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
So then if no other questions to Phyllis, we're back to administrative for Matt and Martin.
Yeah, so for administrative, we have a new position, that's the sustainability coordinator, and that impacts a couple of lines, including payroll costs like travel and training. And then let Martin maybe give some background on the new position.
Thanks, Matt. As Paul mentioned earlier, one of the staffing changes, the main staffing changes for a full FTE this year, was to add a sustainability analysis. Just some quick background on this. Communities around our region have made sustainability a priority in recent years, and most have added staff positions to coordinate these efforts. They also work to represent their communities on regional committees and projects within the county, which we don't always have the ability to do. Now, the staff here has never had a position dedicated specifically to sustainability. Responsibility for this area has typically been part of the town manager's office staff workload, with the assistant town manager position often serving as the lead when we receive a request for information, complaint or a concern, or a program or project inquiry. So with the workload that we have in the manager's office, typically, we often don't have the time to coordinate more than the programming that we have currently and that we're responsible for now. The town's advisory committee for environmental sustainability, ACES, has helped take on some of the programming responsibilities to help the town do more in this area recently, which has been great to see. With this committee being more active in promoting sustainability here, they've also recommended the town board focus and add some investment in sustainability projects and programs going forward. As part of this effort, they unanimously passed a motion during their June 11th meeting this year to recommend the addition of a staff position to coordinate these efforts more broadly. ACES, as you know, is the one committee that the town has that doesn't have a staff member liaison whose job responsibilities include a substantial dedication of time or expertise related to the purpose of that committee. So with the dedicated staff position to coordinate our ongoing efforts and to look for opportunities to expand in these areas, the town could significantly increase our programming and participation in projects around the county, which really just isn't possible given the town's current staffing level. So just as an FYI, some of the programs that we do now related to sustainability include the school-based education programs with EcoCycle. A lot of us have had our kids go to the Wise with Waste tour or participate in the locker room leftovers. Household hazardous waste and the Hard to Recycle event with Boulder County, yard waste drop-off facility, zero waste events for all the town's events, partnering with Boulder County to provide the household hazardous facility, the dog waste compost program at the dog park, the EV station, the electric vehicle charging stations that we have around town that we work to maintain, the garden in a box promotion, residential water and paste audit promotion, and then recycling and composting at all town facilities, and the photovoltaic cells that are at town facilities. as well as participating in things like RAQC, the Regional Air Quality Control Commission. So if approved, some of the objectives that we identified for this position include administering all the town sustainability programs, just being more centralized in how we coordinate these efforts, and then working with ACES to develop and recommend programs to help meet the objectives for the town to impact air quality, climate, waste, energy, to pursue through expanded town programming. And then to have really just a dedicated staff liaison with ACES to coordinate follow-up on programs across town, and also work to track the work plan and program items that they're interested in. And then have dedicated staff time to work on the policy analysis to develop recommendations on programming for ACES and the board on a wide variety of sustainability items that come up during the course of the year that we don't generally have the time to work too much on. And then assembling the report data that comes up.
Hey, Martin, just a question. I mean, there's a lot of information you've given us, and you know, and the only thing in the budget deck is like literally one bullet point that says sustainability head. And, you know, a lot of what you just went through is great context. You know, I think my high level question was, you know, is there 2,000 hours worth of work, which it sounds like you have that here. But can we get this dialed down to, you know, specific expectations for the role and put it in the deck? I mean, because fundamentally, I mean, I'm fully in support of this personally, but, you know, I struggled when I saw it in the deck because it didn't, there wasn't any specific goals. I mean, when I see the sheriff's numbers, I can tie it back to increased population and the need for increased coverage because we've asked for more coverage, et cetera, et cetera. This one to me just kind of came out of nowhere because I know OSAC has been asking for, you know, an open space coordinator, and I'm not clear, at least for me, I'm not clear why the sustainability coordinator made it to the top of the list and for 2021. And that, you know, and I'm personally struggling to understand if there's actually 2,000 hours worth of work on an annual basis for this person.
Coming up with 2,000 hours worth of work isn't going to be a problem for this particular position, just given the nature and scale of what the programs are that are available that we have going on now, that we could do much more, spend a lot more time and energy focusing on, and then also increasing and expanding a number of the programs that other jurisdictions around us have, and that the folks who serve on ACES have been pushing to add. Whether that's items related to the sustainability scorecard or other projects and programs to just promote environmental programs around town. So the filling up the 2,080 hours of staff time isn't particularly a challenge. As far as the prioritization of positions, the department heads are tasked with putting together what we feel are the highest and most important ads for the budget for this coming year. And after going through this process with Paul and his staff and with Matt through the prioritization process, this is the one that I think made the cut from my own personal perspective, because it was something that is a gap in what the town does. We try to offer a wide program or a wide variety of services here to be a full service community with such a small staff. And this is a particular topic area where we just haven't had the resources to dedicate toward it. So if you ask me for a bullet point on this, it's a gap. It's just simply a gap that we've had that we've not been able to address, and it made sense to address this year.
No, and that makes sense to me. And my only ask was like, what is page 9? It literally just says staffing changes, sustainability analyst, full stop, right? Some more context of what you just went through in this packet would have really helped me. You know, because I don't have it at my fingertips in terms of what it is that ACES is trying to do and what gaps they're trying to fill. But what you went through was exactly that. And I think having that in here is the context I was looking for.
So,
and I apologize for that, Neil. I think that was more my fault than anything. I'm flipping through the personnel action tab that's in your supplemental budget, and this FTE request information that I'm trying to summarize quickly for you wasn't included. So that's my oversight, not making sure you.
Yeah, so just a couple of things. One, the first one less substantive, but just, yeah, like Neil, I spent the first 45 seconds, Martin, frankly, not listening, trying to find the document that you were reading from. You know, I thought I was unprepared. And so just as a matter of, if you guys just, we're obviously not going to finish today. Go over the data. If you guys could just in 6 seconds orient us to where we're looking besides the screen, because I've got 4 screens open right this minute. We all have different data in different places, just help with the orientation. If you don't have something, no big deal, just share it with us, because you're obviously, these things are moving very quick. As regards to the position, I need a lot more detail and a lot more conversation. I'll give the example of a couple of years ago, we decided to invest in economic development as a community, and we didn't hire, even though we had a big budget, we didn't hire a full-time employee, we hired a consultant. In this, I would almost want to flip this. I still think we were underinvesting in economic development. I think we should absolutely invest in sustainability. I just wonder, to me, this feels like we're going to get a experienced sustainability person, yet we're asking them to do very senior level positions and very junior level positions. And I almost wonder if we might be better going out to a third party organization where, when we needed advisory services, they could bring somebody with 20 years of experience in that national brand. And then where we needed data entry or, community outreach or whatever, they could bring somebody more at the analyst associate level. I'm a little worried about that was a big job description you read. And I don't know the level of seniority of that person and what she looks like. To me, it feels more like a consultant organization, third party. And I'll just be the first one to volunteer. If we were stacking where we need to make personnel investments, this would not be the top of my list. I will continue to push economic development on the top of my list.
So I'll chime in. I appreciate all the additional context, Martin. In my reading of what I was interpreting this position to be, is someone who comes in and actually moves the needle on our board goal. We've had sustainability as a board goal for however many years, and I mean we've had Mark bring forward the idea of moving us to an entirely sustainable and renewable resources for energy at the town level by a date certain. This is the person that I see helping us get there, that we actually put a lot of this into play. So if that's what this person does, I am in full support, because I think if I look across all of our board goals over the past few years, I think this is probably the one that hasn't moved as much as I personally would have liked to see it move. So I am fully supportive of this if that's the ultimate outcome of what this person will do.
I agree with Ken. That was really well said.
Yeah,
I think the only question I have following up on that, because I think as what Kevin alluded to, there's a long list of things, and we're talking about a $60,000 a year salary here. Is that enough? I mean, I don't know what the market rate is for sustainability analysts. So, given the long scope and the relative differences between data entry and, sort of strategic planning, are we getting the right person for what we're targeting?
Yeah, I agree with all the comments that have been made, and I do agree with Kevin's comments around, is a consultant perhaps better for some of this, and but I do like the idea of someone on staff devoted to this. So maybe it's a hybrid of both. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and for my part, I mean, I'll say I tend to agree with Kevin that economic development is more my priority. I would like to see us allocate more funds there, but I'm thrilled that we're able to address sustainability. We've found this in the budget, so I do want to go forward with it.
Well, maybe, I mean, not to skip ahead too much, we do have economic development a little bit further down the list here. And looking at the budget, we're not even yet spending our full amount that we're allocating in current and prior years for economic development. So I agree, economic development is a absolute huge priority, and we should be working towards that, but we're not even spending all the money that we've allocated there. So I don't see that these need to be mutually exclusive. I think
No, I agree. And I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. That's my point. if it were a choice between the two, I would lean toward economic development, but it seems to me we've managed to do both. So that's why I'm supportive of it.
So if I can just follow up on a couple of things, and then maybe we can find some resolution and find a way to move on. But the idea that Ken touched on about having a board goal, and I meant to touch on that earlier, it was one of the items I had noted. Not having the ability to spend the time and resources on it was definitely a priority as we reviewed this as an item to include in the balanced budget that you're considering, you're starting the consideration of today. So finding ways to move the needle on that is definitely part of it. And the scope of tasks that are included, or that I included in part of that description, is long. It's got a lot of variety in it. And quite honestly, it's a lot like the job descriptions that we have now. I think with such a small staff, we have everybody who works here does a wide variety of things, really from strategic planning down to data entry. All of us do. It's just the nature of being a working lead in the departments that we have here. So it's a combination of both, and really an attempt to just show the breadth and just the nature of what we would be looking for from a person to serve in this particular role. Not that they'd be able to do all of those things right from day one, or they might not necessarily be on the board's list of goals for a particular year or for a particular quarter, but during the course of the of a 5-year budget cycle, whether it's capital programs or something else, the idea that we would have some staffing resources to dedicate to those, not necessarily trying to bring in a consultant to do something on a one-off basis without having the institutional knowledge that is often required to be successful in some of these programs. That was really the purpose for this. So that's the background and context for that. So if there's something else specific I can help with, I'd be glad to.
Well, it seems like this probably needs some more discussion. I would say, I guess I would recommend that we leave it in the budget for now, but staff will go back. We're going to have another budget meeting. It looks like, as Kevin mentioned, I don't think we can get through everything by 4. So that'll give us some time to go through and maybe come up with suggested maybe a hybrid, what that looks like, and maybe what just a consultant base look like. Bring all that back to you at the next meeting and see if we can get some clear direction on how to move forward.
And at a minimum, Martin, you've obviously given us a lot of thought. If you could just share that document or your notes or upload it to the SharePoint site or whatever, that'd be great. Not SharePoint, whatever it is. Dropbox.
Sure.
And Matt, just to at least clarify where my head is at, we've talked about whether consultant is the right idea, whether a hybrid approach is the right idea, staff, whatever. I want to make sure we're spending our time effectively and efficiently. So if there is I would rather have staff figure out whatever is the best way forward. And Martin just gave us some reason about why it makes sense to have a solely staff person do this. That's what I want to make sense. I want to hear. I want to hear why we're going in a certain direction. I don't want to spend time figuring out how much would each of these different directions cost and just trying to build what we've kind of just brainstormed here. Just come back. My goal is to hear what you guys think makes the most sense to get us to our end goals. And that's what I think we should be moving forward with.
Understand. Thanks. This budget is pretty static on everything else, except for point out the Chamber of Commerce support. So last year, the board did approve to increase for the 2020 budget, but the direction that I recall was that was not something that would carry forward for 2021 and beyond unless the board decided to. So we have decreased that back to historic levels of 15,000. You have received a request from the chamber to increase it for next year to above that 15,000 mark, and you've received several emails, I think, from members of the chamber regarding that. And TJ, I believe, is on the meeting with us. He's the executive director for the chamber. So just wanted to point out that staff has reduced that back to historic levels and see if there's any questions or comments with regard to that.
Just a real quick question before we even get into the ask. I mean, you know, when I look at the library budget, we're about 20% of their operating budget, and we have a seat on the board. As a chamber, I mean, has the town ever had a seat on the chamber's board? Because looking at the 2020 actuals, we're about 25, 30% of the operating budget. You know, so from a taxpayer, you know, sort of oversight, you know, it kind of feels to me that, you know, if we're going to be contributing at that level, we should have a board seat just to ensure that we've got the requisite taxpayer oversight, the same that we have at the library.
Yeah, we haven't had a seat on the board. I haven't, in my time here, I haven't had a request from the board to be involved and have a seat on the board. But yeah, we have not.
You know, Neil, historically there's been one or more board members that have typically been members of the chamber. And
oh, don't get me wrong, Clayton. I'm a member of the chamber as well, but there's a difference between a member being on the board. I use the library, but the town is also on the board of the library.
Understand, and those members could be on the board if they chose to do so.
No, and you're missing my point. This is about the taxpayer dollars that the town is contributing towards the board, and the board, this board, the town board, should get a say if it's 20 to 30% of the operating budget, not the person. Yeah, I completely agree. If the person wants to join the board, then they will, you know, operate in that capacity. But when one of us sits on the library board, we're operating there as a representative of the town because of the $350,000 in taxpayer dollars we're sending over to Louisville. So the question is ultimately, for 20 to 30% of the operating budget of the chamber, do we not have a responsibility to oversee the spending of the taxpayer dollars that we're contributing?
I don't personally think that's necessary, but that's just my opinion.
So can we hear from TJ before we actually get into additional discussion about this, if he was going to speak on this?
Hello, everyone. I don't have anything additional other than what I sent to you already in the letter requesting on behalf of the board, and then the subsequent email I sent you with all the requested documentation plus. So I'm happy to answer any questions. And Neil, if there's discussion of board, I can address that too if that's something you want to hear about. So
TJ, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
On the board seat?
Yes.
Yeah. I fundamentally, honestly, it's not my decision. That would be something I'd have to bring up with my board, obviously. I think it makes a lot of sense, but it's been my feeling that the relationship is pretty tight anyway, and that the communication is pretty strong. But I don't see any reason why that wouldn't make sense. So we actually have a board seat open right now that just came open in the last week. One of our members is relocating out of state, one of our board members. So we actually have an open seat now. And then we elect 3 new spots through the membership. There's a process that has to go through per our constitution of members have to vote on that. We slate, the board slates people and then the members vote on it. So there's a process that would have to be followed, but it's not complicated. And I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be wonderful. I just don't know. I think the board would want some input on who that was. You know, I don't think a random person from the town that is not vetted and has nothing and no knowledge of the chamber would make sense, but a board member, a staff person, something like that would be awesome. So I have no objection to that. But it's not my decision. Let me just make that clear. So.
I think I don't necessarily want, I mean, it's an interesting conversation, good suggestion, Neil, but the board seat almost, you know, if we're going to provide a grant, I don't know, I'm not sure I would want to, you know, money that we're providing grants shouldn't really come with strings, right? I mean, we make a decision, and the library is different because it's an amenity, right? So, and we've got taxpayer dollars, a lot of taxpayer dollars going over there until that amenity is here. So I don't know. I mean, I think we could decouple the board seat from the funding conversation, the grant conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an interesting conversation, but it doesn't really affect my decision on the actual funding request. Frankly, like the proportion of the total Superior Chamber budget that the town of Superior is funding or is being asked to fund, to me, isn't necessarily the right way to look at this, because I look at it from the perspective of what does the chamber actually accomplish based on what its budget is. And the chamber has a very small budget. So naturally, if we give $30,000, $40,000, that's going to be a large percentage of the chamber's total budget. But when you think about what the chamber has actually accomplished, especially this year in light of COVID with the Hungry Heroes program and all the outreach that we're doing for additional businesses, I think it's absolutely critical to continue to support the chamber. This is a relatively small dollar amount. It's less than what we funded last year. So I'm 100% supportive of meeting the full ask that the chamber is making of us this year. I think we should continue doing it. I think it is a reasonable investment in our town's economy and future. And if we're willing to make that investment in a economic development consultant, I think it's consistent to do so by supporting the chamber. So I'd recommend that we move on and approve the ask and move forward with the budget consideration going forward.
So I appreciate everything that the chamber does for the community. And I think overall it's an obvious value add to have the chamber as active as it is with both our town events and the business community. Looking at our budget, obviously right now we have $15,000 slotted in there, as I referenced earlier. If you look at the 2020 budget, we're estimating that we're only going to spend $110,000 of the 150. We have 150 budgeted again this year. And I mean, Matt or Paul or anybody else, unless we have something else planned economic development wise, that means we're probably going to come in with another $40,000 under budget. So in my mind, we could divert or just still use that line item, but do an additional $15,000 grant from our economic development line item. One thing I did want to bring up in this conversation is one of the things that I'm concerned about is when there are organizations that we do provide grants or funds to, I want to make sure that there is no potential for just perceived or actual conflicts. Something that I have noticed is that TJ, both you and some of the board members within the chamber have done endorsements of people on the board. This can carry a perceived conflict of trying to ensure that somebody who's on the board, if they want to get your endorsement, they'll make sure that they support budget requests going forward. I want to make sure we avoid any type of appearance of a conflict. So I would feel a whole lot better, and frankly, I'd put my support on this request as contingent upon a change to the board, the chamber policy, that none of the officers or the board members of the chamber can endorse people who are running for the town board, just to make sure we reduce and eliminate all possible conflicts.
I would really strongly disagree with that approach. And I say that as someone without a dog in the fight. I'm clearly not running for re-election this year, but I mean, we have so many different organizations that we work with, and there are so many people that provide endorsements. To me, it's one thing if the Chamber of Commerce were saying, you know, hey, Ken, $1,000 for your campaign, all right, like that's problematic. But I think a simple endorsement, I would fully support anyone being able to do that and everyone being able to say who they support. I'm thinking through other organizations like Meals on Wheels, for example. I'm thinking back to when I campaigned a couple of years ago. I had an endorsement from the head of Meals on Wheels, and I don't think that we should put restrictions on who can and can't give endorsements. For that matter, many of us on the board who are not being reelected are being asked for endorsements. So I think saying that we're just not going to support different candidates verbally, I have a real problem with that, versus if we're talking about financial incentives, I'm with you, Ken.
So there's a very different, there's differences between people who are on our board being asked to give endorsements and whatnot. I'm not going to be able to allocate more money to somebody else, or people aren't going to be able to allocate money to me because I'm a board member. There's no financial conflict here. There is a financial conflict because the chamber comes and asks for money from this board every year. So there is a financial conflict, and when we have that even appearance of a conflict, again, this is my day job, so I'm especially attuned to it, but that's something I want to stay away from 100%. And yet, normally I would say absolutely, people should endorse whoever they want. But if there is a financial relationship with the town, people who are officers or members of those organizations should not be making any type of endorsement for people running for our board.
The chamber itself does not do endorsements, nor does it make any contributions of any political kind. The board decided in the last year a policy that individual board members and any staff members could do whatever they wanted to with their personal funds and their personal whatever. So that's what we've been operating under. So frankly, I think it would be fine if it was an employee restriction, because my board can certainly tell me what to do and not do because I'm paid. But a lot of our board members are Superior residents. I don't think they would like being muzzled in terms of who they could support. Stephanie, our president of our board, is a Superior resident and very active, and I don't think it's fair to say that because she serves on the chamber board, she can't, express her political point of view. So maybe there's a place in the middle. Maybe there's a place in the middle.
It's an interesting conversation. I think the sticky thing here is, particularly with the chamber, since you're hosting an event, and you definitely not unlike the League of Women Voters, wouldn't think it would be appropriate for any leader on the League of Women Voters or the moderator on the League of Women Voters to endorse a candidate. So, but I agree with TJ wholeheartedly that people should be able to do whatever they want to do, and if they want to throw an endorsement behind a candidate, I think they should be able to do so. And I think we have to be really careful trying to muzzle people, particularly business owners who might be board members. So it's complicated for a couple different reasons. One reason, because the chamber's hosting that meet the candidate, face the chamber type event. And so it's an TJ, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the first time you guys have done this, right?
Yeah, part of the board wanted to move into limited advocacy just to promote, but we haven't even had a situation where the chambers had to come up in front of the trustees and oppose something that the trustees want to do. It's a little bit of a slippery slope. Like, okay, if the town is in giving a grant to the chamber, does that mean the chamber can't ever oppose staff on something? I think that would be dangerous, probably not in the best interest of the town. So I don't know. The Face the Chamber was really meant to be a way to make sure that business-oriented questions were asked of candidates, because I don't think that had necessarily existed before from the business community as it is. So that was the point of it. It was not.
Yeah, I hear you. I personally don't think it's that. I don't think for me the endorsement. I want to. It's a budget meeting, so we start with the budget. But I want to respond to Ken's sort of conditional request, it does beg for the appearance of a conflict of interest. And TJ, to disclose, TJ and I had a conversation yesterday. He requested that there were a set of criteria that I had to abide by in order to receive the endorsement of TJ, and I declined. I declined those criteria, not because I didn't agree with the criteria itself. I have made a decision that I'm not going to promise anything or do anything in return for an endorsement. If somebody wants to endorse me, I'm thrilled and I'm honored. But for me, there's no give and take that's going to be requested. So I declined even having further conversations with TJ about his personal endorsement. Businesses are separate.
I guess I'm really confused on what the problem is here. I mean, one thing, as I'm talking to candidates who are running for board, I'm saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? I'm not necessarily saying once if you are elected, you must do this, but I'm absolutely taking that into account in my decisions of who to endorse, who to talk to my friends about, et cetera. I mean, that's part of the political process, is understanding people's opinions.
Right.
And in my opinion,
Laura, I think the challenge here is the town is 40% of the operating budget for this year. And if not for that, I have no problems with it.
It's
because
25.
I'm sorry, you're right. It's 22%. I had 40,000 in my head. Because of that number, because that number is a large number. With Meals on Wheels, we contribute 2,000. It's probably 1% of their operating budget. It's a de minimis amount, but this is a significant number. And I think it's that level of uncomfortability that Ken was alluding to that I think should give us all pause, right? Because and part of my rationale, the potential oversight is and I hate bringing up dirty laundry, but I mean there's a Superior Chamber of Commerce tweet handle. There was a tweet that came out after the decision about the bridge, and I voted for the bridge, but I found it a little offensive because 3 of my colleagues chose not to support the bridge, right? So if a political statement is being made by Twitter, with an organization that we're funding, it creates a lot of uncomfortability for me. If the town was contributing 0 to the chamber, I got no problem with what they say, free First Amendment right. But if we're a quarter of the operating budget, we just have to question it. Fundamentally here, that we're talking about 0.6% of the town's budget, and we've spent more time on this than we have on virtually everything. I'm fully in support of what the chamber does. The optics of the endorsements and the Twitter or tweet are what I have a problem with.
Okay, as to the question at hand about the budget request, I'm fully in support of the $30,000 request. I think the chamber has done an incredible job this year with rallying to support our existing businesses. I think historically that's always been our challenge, is to have the support of existing businesses in mind. We seem to always be focused on how do we attract new businesses, how do we attract new things, but the really critical base and the things that make up the character of the town as we see it are the existing businesses, and our chamber really has that in mind, as well as attracting new things. But they've done an incredible amount of work. None of us had a playbook for how this year was going to work out, and they came up with the programs that Mark mentioned on the fly, and board members and just general members of the chamber jumped in, and it felt really good to see the response. So I support 30,000. I would support 60,000. I think that we've got an incredible asset with our chamber, and just I support them fully. Okay, others. Otherwise, I think we ought to move on to other items.
Yeah, Clint, I like what you said. I mean, I think we need to have a significant conversation about economic development. And I personally don't think the role of the chamber is to help us recruit new business. I think they are a factor in helping us recruit new business, but I don't think they're driving that. I do think where the Chamber's done a really nice job this year is pivoting from, those, TJ, I forgot what the 3 Ps were, but I remember pageant in there, pageants, parades, and something, into an organization that really helped. And I think the networking that helps with our home-based businesses and our smaller business, not just home-based, but our smaller businesses, is tremendously useful. I think we have to do a lot better job recruiting all of our businesses. And, if you are in the town of Superior, since we are funding such a large event, a large portion of the budget, I'd really like to see every business as part of the town participating at some level. I just don't understand why others wouldn't be participating. So I think we need to move the needle on that. And last year during this conversation, it may have been a later budget conversation, we did ask for a 5-year plan. And I know that plan is, and it's a 3-year, and I know you're sort of defining the strategy around the 3 Cs, but we have to evolve into a sustainability model. And if that sustainability model is going to be, hey, we're going to have to contribute, that's, maybe that's part of the model. But I think we really need a long-term 3-5-year plan for how we achieve this sustainability model. And as TJ and I talked offline yesterday, it was a chicken and egg problem. We don't have the businesses that a Broomfield or Boulder is going to have. So it's an unrealistic expectation to think they're going to be completely self-sustainable until we develop the downtown core, until we fill some of the vacancies in the Safeway Shopping Center and in the Brixmore Shopping Center. So I think supporting our current businesses makes sense. But as we grow, I really want to see, just as Mark asked last year, I really want to see that 3-year or 5-year strategic plan to have that sustainability model. And that's going to help avoid these somewhat awkward year-over-year conversations, which is the exact comment Mark made last year.
Okay, others? All right, TJ, thanks for joining.
Bear, I'm sorry, but I don't feel like I have clarification on how you want this line item, and maybe I missed it as far as leaving it as is, or I heard from a couple clear responses, but I don't feel like I have that direction.
Okay, can those opposed to $30,000, changing this line item to $30,000, please speak up? Okay, $30,000.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. We'll go back to Matt or
We'll move on to finance.
okay.
Hey, wait, before we move on to finance, I think we didn't really talk about the economic development line item. I think Ken had alluded to the fact that we had 150K in the budget for 2020. Looks like we're going to spend 110. We're jacking it up to 150 going out. Can you talk about why we're short, by 20% this year, and how we're going to spend more money next year?
Yeah, I mean, we there's some things we just didn't do this year because of the pandemic. We didn't travel to ICSC. We didn't have the publication and media outreach for that conference that we typically have. And we typically go to one other economic development conference, whether it's Better City or Staff and Better City. That did not occur. We did go to the one in Los Angeles this year in February. And then the additional publication and outreach to the national markets as far as downtown Superior. We were going to coordinate that with the beginning of the construction of downtown Superior Main Street, the Morgan Ranch project, and getting that going and really push hard for getting people interested in leases. And that's kind of been pushed off as well because they haven't secured their financing, and we don't think it's going to happen until after the first of the year, hopefully by the first of the year. So So those are some costs that you're not going to see in that line item, but you will see moving forward. And then we have you'll hear about it more on Monday. Better Cities proposing a C-Source marketing tool that can capture people that are visiting the town and partner with our local businesses to send advertisements out to those people that are currently in town shopping, whether they're at the sports stable or in the marketplace, and promote their businesses, whether it's restaurants or whatever. So you'll hear about that on Monday from Adam, but that's something that we're looking to do as well. And it would be a match with the local businesses to help advertise and market their businesses to people that are in town. So those are some costs that aren't in this year's line item that you will see moving forward.
Are we spending enough? Like, I mean, everything you went through, if we talk about downtown Superior, at some point that's going to come online, but we're spending the same amount we're talking about right now. 2021 is 150, 2025 is 150. As we start bringing in more space, we start trying to actually land some office users. What do we need to be doing here? Is it enough?
Yeah, I mean, it's every city along the corridor is struggling with this, just because the amount of retail that currently exists on the corridor. To find those outside businesses that aren't currently here is rare, whether it's Medtronics, or some business like that, those are rare finds, and they're hard to find, and getting just the population, in town. That's what we struggle with on a daytime population for our restaurants, because we just don't have that office daytime crowd to support the restaurants during the day. We have the nighttime crowd, and but it's something. I mean, Louisville, Broomfield, Bold, they all have economic development directors and personnel on staff, and they continue to, see vacancies and struggle. It's just.
And Matt, I think you hit on exactly what I was hoping we'd be at that point now. We kind of used the first couple of years with Better City, as a consultant, but speaking for myself, and I think some of the board, we had viewed this as a staff member, at some point. I don't personally see this role being adequately filled in the long-term future by a consultant. To me, this is core to the town. And having somebody living and breathing in Superior, I think, does wonders for the future of the development of the town. Nothing against Adam. Adam's great. Better City's great, but he's in Utah, right? So, I think the affinity that he may have for Superior is going to be different. He's a client as opposed to, 100% of his salary is from the town.
Yeah.
I'll just echo what Neil is saying here, that I do not think, I struggle every year with this is one of the most important things we can do. We all know this, but at some point in the future, Costco and Target will no longer be here. Hopefully that will be 30 years after we're all, out or longer, but big box is going to go away. We have to diversify. We say this, yet we budget for it, yet we do not execute on this. And this year we have very few people predicted a global pandemic, or at least not this year to have the global pandemic. So I get the fact that conferences are down and things are down and nobody's going anywhere, and there's the occasional unicorn like a Medtronic, but we need to spend more money finding those unicorns or more time finding those unicorns. And maybe it's going to be a bunch of baby unicorns that we need to get, but it is the fact that we 2 years in a row under-delivered on this budget, to me, is very frustrating. I don't want to spend money for nothing, but it just feels like we should be doing a lot more as a town, as a board, as staff. And, if we were looking for a full-time staffer, this is, again, I said this before, versus the economic, the sustainability person who's going to be, kind of associate type level, some experience, but not a very senior executive. Matt, I see this with somebody with your type of experience, with Martin's type of experience, who we can get out and put in front of real estate officials and could lead a team of developing marketing content. And Adam is doing that to some extent. And again, I'm a fan of Adam, but we're getting a lot of data from Adam. We haven't yet seen results. And I wouldn't mind having somebody that was a little closer to our community. And so I think we should look hard at this, but it's probably for the purpose of the budget, I'm supportive of 150. Is Clint, Clint on the last line said he's supportive of 30, he'd be supportive of 60. For this line, I'm supportive of 150. I'm supportive of 300. We cannot spend enough money on this. But whatever we budget, we have to have a plan to do it and make sure that there's an ROI associated with it. And that doesn't mean a return necessarily in 2021, but we have to start rebranding this town, and we have to get these businesses in by 2022, 2023, 2024, or we're going to have some real problems. So I'd be supportive of more money, but maybe it's a retreat topic to talk specifically about the best way to get the most value for the budgeted dollars.
Kevin, I appreciate the comments, and I agree about a retreat topic. I support the 150 for budget purposes. I think, to me, the number one thing that we need to be laser focused on right now is the approved FDP that we have sitting on a shelf for downtown Superior. It was approved in December, and it's now, they're trying to figure it out. I mean, it took 2 years to get to that point. And we talk about let's throw more money at things, but we've got a thing sitting on the shelf that we need to get out of the ground and going. I don't know the answers. I don't want to give away what we were promised and all of those things. But I don't, as I reflect back on our last discussion with our Morgan Ranch discussion, I don't feel good about how we left that. We left it as, guys, no thanks, go figure it out. I don't think that's good enough. So yes, I'd like to see this be a topic that we dive into as soon as possible, because we can throw money at all kind of things, but that's where we as a board can make decisions to help get that going. And it's not just throwing money at things.
Yeah, Clint, thanks. I agree with what you said. I mean, I think that would be, so it's a good example of, it's sort of outside of Adam's limited scope of work to advise us on, whether or not the position we took with Morgan Ranch was the right position, or whether or not we had other, if we had a staffer, would we be putting that staffer on an airplane to go meet with their, potential bondholders? I don't, to say, here's why you should invest in this community. It's a good example. I agree with you. That is where we should be laser focused. And, I don't like sitting around hoping for the best. Hope is not a very good strategy for me. So I'm with you.
Okay. All right. Matt or Paul, we can continue.
So I think the takeaway on that one is, 150 approved, but, it's got to be the immediate retreat topic to make sure we've got an execution strategy.
And I think along those lines, because this is not just a 2021 budget, it's the 22 through 25. I think directionally, I'm comfortable with increasing this, not necessarily for 21, because I don't think we can spend it fast enough. In 21, 150 sounds right. But beyond that, I completely agree. It should be a staffer and, augmented with a consultant at the front end. But let's be real. I mean, look at Louisville, Broomfield, Boulder, everybody, they've got on staff people helping them. And I think we need to start pivoting to that sooner rather than later.
So this is kind of turning into a retreat. Can we move on with the budget? I think we're all on the same page here that we want to have a further conversation, but we're supportive of the 150.
So for the finance department, we are looking at inflationary increase. Really the only lines that have changed is we've changed our staffing approach for utility billing. Over the last several years, we've had a couple of part-timers. They both have recently left. We went through a recruitment process. Best individual for the job was a regular full-time position. The dollar amount, it was a wash between the salary and benefits on both those positions. So that's really the only change you will see there in finance. So unless there are questions, then we'll drop down to legal. And generally, we're looking at obviously continuing Kendra at her general budgeted amount. That's what's called general legal services. And then we have a allocation if needed for Jefferson Parkway as well as oil and gas work.
Jeff Parkway, is that a retainer or that's as needed?
That is as needed.
Thank you.
And that's to not to Kendra's firm, correct? That's
Gable House.
Gable House.
He's done work for us this year. I mean, I don't understand why the year to date is 0, but whatever.
We still have the pending litigation with regard to the trail system on Rocky Flats. That's in the federal court system, and we still have no timeline for when a decision is expected.
No, I know, but I mean, I'm sure Tim has done 50 hours worth of work for us this year. I just don't know why we don't have a bill or whatever. Maybe he doesn't charge us. I should.
Well, yeah, he hasn't had to do a lot of work because we've been waiting for the courts to, the pandemic hit in March, and everything's kind of been stalled out since then.
Okay. Yeah, I don't complain when people don't want to charge. Don't worry.
And then the oil and gas line, is that Matt Sura?
Correct. It is. Yep.
And then, we still got 10K and, into the future. Do we truly see that as being needed? We got the BMPs, we've got, all the regs that we had wanted.
We do, but the state's going to make, decisions on setbacks and stuff. And those, we're going to want to incorporate those, I would imagine, into our code. And so we'll need, we're going to ask him for his legal advice as well.
Got it. Thanks.
We chatted with Sheriff Pelley on public safety. So I think, Martin, what comments on building inspection?
Thanks, Paul. Nothing out of the ordinary with building inspection. The deviation each year is tied with the value of the construction. Other than that, there aren't any variations this year.
So we're 6 minutes before 4. Do we want to delve into Parks and Rec and Public Works now? Or do you want to talk about next meeting in the future?
I don't want to rush through Parks and Rec. I think there's a lot in here. Trying to jam any of it into a 3-minute conversation is probably doing us a disservice. I'd rather just focus on finding another slot.
I agree. I think that makes sense.
So unless there's any disagreement with that approach, I think what we'll do is get Shannon to doodle poll. And, we typically in the past years, first 3 hours, we've been able to get through governmental capital. So what my sense is we may need a little bit more than 3 hours, but maybe we'll talk with Matt and get some date and time options out to everybody here, if that sounds reasonable.
Works for me.
Sounds good.
Do we try to do this real time? I mean, is it, doodle poll takes a couple days, or is it's just the way we got to do it? I mean, I've got I'm looking at my calendar now. I'm ready to go real time if people want to.
Me too.
I think that'd be awesome from staff's perspective.
That's
Yeah.
fine with me.
Yep, I've got my calendar up.
So let's just start next week with Tuesday afternoon or morning.
So I'll confess that the late afternoon evenings are frankly going to work better for me. You know, I gave one availability of 1 to 4, and that was the one we selected, but my preference just for my work schedule. I mean, I'll prioritize this and cancel meetings, but my preference would be later afternoon into the evening, but I know other people have other concerns. So let's just start generally around what block are we seeking out?
I can't.
Yeah, I
do-
mean, unless we go out to the week of the 28th, my weekdays are booked. Like I would need an evening for sure. I can't cancel work meetings on a couple days notice. Like no problem with this because we had it in advance, but I can't do that at the last minute.
Doodle poll.
Doodle poll it is. Sorry guys, I tried.
No, I mean, I think a doodle poll is just as efficient. Let's just make sure we all respond to it tonight. The problem is just when people take too long to respond.
We'll get something out
I
tomorrow.
resemble that comment, Laura.
What was that?
I resemble that comment. I will do it this evening, I promise.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll get something out tomorrow and get something on the calendar.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Sounds
All
good.
right.